My name is Harper. I am 28 years old and I am a senior corporate accountant. My father called me the Shadow my entire life until I walked into my sister's wedding, holding hands with the billionaire CEO she tried to marry, and every guest turned to stare in shock. Before I tell you exactly how I turned from the invisible sister into the main character of my own life, take a second to hit the like button and subscribe if you enjoy stories about absolute justice. I would also love to know where you are watching from right now and what time it is there, so drop a comment below. Right now, I am standing outside the Magnolia Hills Country Club in the freezing rain, staring at a forged bank document glowing on my phone screen. The cold water is soaking through my tailored wool coat, but I barely feel it. My heart is hammering against my ribs so hard, it physically aches. I am not looking at just any document. I am looking at the absolute destruction of my financial life, engineered by the people who were supposed to protect me. For 28 years, I have been the reliable, invisible daughter in the background. Growing up in our chaotic household, I learned early that safety meant making myself as small and useful as possible. My father, Thomas, made sure I understood my exact place. He called me his little shadow. He said it with a smile that never quite reached his eyes, framing it as a term of endearment. But it was never a compliment. It was a strict directive. A shadow does not speak. A shadow does not demand attention. A shadow simply follows the source of light. In our family, that blinding light was my younger sister, Ashley. Ashley was the golden child, the aspiring socialite, the girl who collected beauty pageant crowns and wealthy boyfriends, while I collected academic degrees and overtime hours. I told myself it did not matter. I buried myself in spreadsheets and audit reports, climbing the corporate ladder at my accounting firm by sheer force of will. I built a quiet, stable life, fueled by a desperate, lingering hope that if I just worked hard enough and gave enough of myself, my father would finally look at me with the same pride he reserved for Ashley. I wanted him to see my value. I wanted to be more than just a shadow. I stood in the heavy rain, clutching my phone and staring at the digital signature that was not mine, realizing that my desperate need for his approval had just cost me everything. The rain battered the screen of my phone, distorting the numbers that proved my own family had betrayed me in the most horrific way imaginable. The country club behind me buzzed with warmth and laughter, filled with people celebrating a wedding built entirely on lies, while I stood shivering in the cold dark, completely alone and utterly broken. I reflected on every single time I had let them diminish me just to keep the peace. Every forgotten birthday, every dismissed achievement, every time they looked right through me, as if I was made of glass. I had spent my entire existence molding myself into whatever shape they needed, hoping that one day they would realize I was a person worthy of their love. But standing there with the cold rain soaking into my skin, the bitter truth finally washed over me. They never wanted a daughter. They only ever wanted a tool they could use until it broke. It started 2 days ago with a phone call that I should have ignored. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing a complex quarterly tax filing for one of my firm's top clients when my father called. He rarely called me during the workday unless he needed something fixed. I picked up the phone, expecting him to ask for help with his computer or a basic tax question. Instead, his voice was tight with manufactured panic. He told me we had a minor emergency regarding Ashley's upcoming wedding. Ashley was marrying Derek, a wealthy vice president at Pierce Holdings. Derek was the ultimate prize in my father's eyes, a man who could elevate our family status to the elite high society circles Ashley had always craved. The wedding was supposed to be the spectacular social event of the year. My father explained that there was a sudden temporary shortfall with the wedding caterer. He said the vendor required an immediate $40,000 deposit to secure the extravagant menu Ashley had chosen, and his liquid assets were temporarily tied up in some offshore investments. He needed me to wire my entire life savings to cover the gap immediately. I sat in my ergonomic office chair, completely stunned. $40,000 was everything I had saved over 5 grueling years. It was the down payment for the house I desperately wanted to buy. It was my hard-earned security net. I tried to explain this to him. I kept my voice calm and professional, telling him that I could not simply liquidate my entire savings account for a fancy party. I offered to look at his budget to help him find the funds elsewhere. The line went dead silent for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then my father deployed the exact emotional manipulation he had perfected over 2 decades. His tone shifted from panicked to deeply disappointed. He lowered his voice, making it sound heavy with paternal sorrow. "Ashley is the star. Harper," he said, the words landing like physical blows to my chest. "You are the shadow. Shadows support the light. Do your part for the family. Do not be the reason your sister's perfect day is ruined." I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers against my temples, trying to fight back the tears welling up. The absolute unfairness of it burned in my throat. I wanted to scream that I mattered too. I wanted to ask why my future, my home, my security was always collateral damage for Ashley's vanity. The only person who ever understood this dynamic was my older brother's wife, Maya. Maya is a brilliant African-American forensic data analyst, and she is the only person in our family who has ever seen my true worth. I thought about calling her before making the transfer, but beneath the anger was that same pathetic childhood longing, the desperate, aching need to be a good daughter, to be valued, to finally hear him say, "Thank you, Harper. I am so proud of you." I told myself it was just a temporary loan. Derek was wealthy. My father promised they would pay me back the moment Derek's massive quarterly bonus cleared. I reasoned that helping them would finally prove my absolute loyalty and secure my rightful place in the family. So I swallowed my pride and opened my banking portal. I watched the numbers drop from 40,000 to 0. Years of skipped vacations, packed lunches, and late-night audits vanished in a single click. I transferred the funds, establishing my absolute trust and sacrifice for a family that saw me as nothing more than a convenient resource to be drained. I felt a sickening twist in my stomach as the confirmation screen popped up, but I pushed it down, telling myself I had done the right thing. I had supported the light. I had played my part perfectly, but sacrificing my own hard-earned security was just the beginning of the nightmare. The real horror began when I tried to log back into my portal an hour later to double-check the remaining balance in my checking account. My father had not just asked for my savings. He had set a brutal trap that would drag me into a criminal conspiracy so deep I would have to risk federal prison just to clear my own name. I did not know it then, sitting in my quiet office feeling virtuous and utterly empty. I did not know that the wedding shortfall was a complete lie fabricated to exploit my trust. I did not know that Derek was not the wealthy, successful executive he pretended to be. I only knew that my chest felt hollow and that my father had not even bothered to say thank you before hanging up the phone. He simply took what he felt he was owed and left me in the absolute dark. That $40,000 was the key that unlocked the darkest financial secrets of my family. And as the rain continued to pour down around me outside the country club, I realized that being the reliable, invisible shadow had nearly destroyed my entire life. But a shadow is only invisible until the light shifts. And I was about to completely change the entire direction of the light forever, ensuring that everyone who tried to ruin me would face the absolute justice they deserved. The storm was only just beginning, and I was no longer afraid of the thunder, because I was about to become the lightning that would burn their perfect illusion to the ground, leaving absolutely nothing but ashes behind. I sat perfectly still in my ergonomic office chair, while the glow of my dual monitors cast a harsh blue light across my desk. My father's words echoed in my ears, forming a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. "Shadows support the light. Do your part for the family." My hands hovered over the keyboard. For 5 grueling years, I had poured every ounce of my energy into building a secure life. I tracked every single penny. I managed immense risk for massive corporations. I knew exactly how to protect assets. Yet here I was preparing to liquidate my entire $40,000 savings account simply because my father demanded it to pay for my sister Ashley's luxury wedding caterer. I told myself it was fine. I told myself that this massive sacrifice would finally make him look at me with genuine pride. I took a deep, trembling breath and opened a new tab on my browser, navigating straight to my personal banking portal. I typed in my credentials with practiced precision. The loading screen spun for a fraction of a second before my financial dashboard appeared. I moved my mouse toward the transfer tab, fully intending to move the funds to my checking account so I could wire them to my father immediately. But before I could initiate the transfer, a solid red alert banner flashed aggressively across the top of my screen. It was an urgent credit monitoring notification directly from my bank. As a senior corporate accountant, my credit score was a profound point of professional pride. I had maintained a flawless score of 820 for years. I paid every bill weeks early. I carried absolutely zero debt outside of my modest car loan. My financial record was spotless. I clicked on the red banner, fully expecting it to be a minor glitch or a routine system update. The page refreshed slowly. I stared at the screen while my brain stubbornly refused to process the numbers displayed in bold text. My credit score had plummeted to 510. A physical wave of severe nausea rolled over me, making the room spin. My hands went ice cold. 510 was not a system glitch. That was the desperate score of someone in catastrophic financial ruin. My professional instincts completely overrode my emotional paralysis in a matter of seconds. I immediately requested a comprehensive credit report, pulling detailed raw data from all 3 major bureaus. The document generated, and I opened it, scanning the dense columns of financial data with the rapid, ruthless efficiency of a corporate auditor. What I saw made the breath completely leave my lungs. There were 5 active lines of credit that I had never applied for in my entire life. I stared at 2 massive personal loans and 3 high-limit platinum credit cards. The total outstanding balance was exactly $150,000. The accounts had all been opened over the past 4 months. The balances were entirely maxed out, down to the last available cent. I scrolled further down the page, looking for the origination details. The loans were tied directly and undeniably to my precise Social Security number. The billing addresses were routed to a digital mail forwarding service I had never heard of, located in a different state. My vision blurred as panic set in. $150,000 in highly toxic fraudulent debt. My $40,000 savings account felt completely insignificant compared to this massive, catastrophic financial crater. Someone had stolen my identity. Someone had meticulously gathered my highly sensitive personal information, including my exact Social Security number, my employment history, and my previous residential addresses. They had used that data to secure top-tier credit approvals. The thief knew exactly what they were doing. They had bypassed standard fraud triggers by making minimum payments for the first 2 months before suddenly maxing out every single account at once. This was a sophisticated, highly targeted financial attack. I looked incredibly closely at the detailed transaction histories listed on the report. The purchases were not random electronics or luxury vacations typically associated with identity theft. They were massive consecutive wire transfers to boutique event planning companies, luxury floral vendors, and high-end catering services. I felt a strange, uncomfortable prickle of confusion. Why would an identity thief use stolen funds to pay for local event vendors? My mind raced desperately, trying to find a logical explanation for this bizarre spending pattern. I needed to call the fraud department immediately. I needed to lock down my Social Security number to prevent further damage. But more than anything, I needed help. I needed my father. He was a seasoned businessman who always knew how to handle crisis situations. He would know exactly who to call in the local police department to expedite a criminal investigation. I picked up my phone to call him back, but the call went straight to voicemail. I knew I could not just sit in my quiet office waiting for a callback while my entire financial life burned to the ground. The initial shock was rapidly morphing into an overwhelming surge of pure adrenaline. I grabbed my heavy wool coat, my purse, and my car keys. I practically ran out of the accounting firm, completely ignoring my confused colleagues who asked if I was okay. I simply did not have time to stop and explain. I rode the elevator down to the parking garage while my mind frantically calculated the devastating impact of this massive fraud. If I did not clear my name immediately, I could absolutely lose my certified public accountant license. My entire career was built entirely on unquestionable financial integrity. A sudden default on $150,000 of unexplained debt would destroy my professional reputation overnight. I got into my car and started the engine. The freezing rain was coming down much harder now, drumming violently against the windshield like a frantic warning. I pulled out of the concrete garage and merged onto the slick highway, heading straight for my parents' house in the upscale suburbs. The drive usually took 40 minutes, but I drove with a reckless desperation, gripping the leather steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned completely white. The windshield wipers beat a loud, frantic rhythm that matched my racing heart. $150,000. $150,000. The terrifying number chanted in my head over and over again, blocking out all other thoughts. I tried desperately to piece together how my highly protected data could have been breached in the first place. I used complex, encrypted passwords for everything. I never logged into unsecured public networks. The only physical documents containing my full social security number and comprehensive financial history were locked inside a heavy fireproof safe hidden in my apartment. And there was exactly one other place: my parents' home office. I had left a thick folder of my old tax returns there 2 years ago when I helped my father sort out some complex discrepancies in his own corporate filings. But I immediately pushed that terrible thought away. It was a completely irrational, absurd leap. Identity theft happened to millions of innocent people every single day through massive anonymous corporate data breaches. It was a faceless, nameless modern crime. It had to be a pure coincidence that the stolen funds were being used to pay for elite event vendors, right at the exact moment my sister Ashley was planning her extravagant wedding. It was just my anxious, exhausted mind trying to find familiar patterns where absolutely none existed. My family might be dismissive and demanding, but they were not criminals. My father might call me a shadow and treat me like a convenient stepping stone for Ashley, but he was a respected man in our community. I convinced myself that I was being paranoid. I needed my family right now. I needed their support and their resources to help me fight this invisible thief who was trying to ruin my life. I finally turned onto my parents' quiet tree-lined street. The sprawling manicured lawns and grand colonial houses looked gray and deeply uninviting under the heavy, dark storm clouds. I pulled into their wide, perfectly paved driveway. My father's luxury sedan was parked near the large garage alongside a sleek black sports utility vehicle that belonged to Derek, my sister's fiancé. Derek was the incredibly wealthy vice president at Pierce Holdings, the exact type of man my father endlessly worshipped. Seeing his car parked there gave me a brief sudden wave of relief. Derek was a powerful corporate executive who dealt with high-stakes contracts daily. He would definitely have valuable connections with high-level defense attorneys or private fraud investigators who could help me navigate this catastrophic disaster. I turned off the engine and sat in the quiet car for a few seconds, letting the cold, damp air seep through the glass windows. I gathered the printed copies of the credit reports I had quickly run off at the office printer before leaving. The thick stack of pages was a terrifying physical manifestation of my ruined credit score. I stepped out into the freezing rain, intentionally not bothering to grab an umbrella from the back seat. The freezing cold water soaked into my wool coat almost instantly, but I marched directly up the paved brick walkway toward the heavy oak front door. I did not bother ringing the brass doorbell. I still carried my brass house key on my ring. I just wanted to get inside to the warmth, find my father, show him the devastating papers, and let the adults figure out exactly how to stop this escalating nightmare. I unlocked the heavy front door and pushed it open, stepping out of the freezing storm and into the warm, familiar foyer of my childhood home. I had absolutely no idea that I was not stepping into a safe haven to seek comfort and help. I was blindly walking directly into the absolute center of the ultimate betrayal. I held the damp credit reports against my chest, expecting to find my father to help me fix this catastrophe. But the living room was empty. Instead, I heard voices drifting down the hallway from his private study. The heavy mahogany doors were left open slightly, a warm golden light spilled out onto the rug. I heard the unmistakable sound of fine crystal clinking together, followed by bright, relaxed laughter. I recognized my sister's high-pitched giggle, instantly followed by my father's booming chuckle and Derek's smooth, confident voice. I crept down the hallway in my silent stocking feet. My hands were trembling as I pressed my back against the wall, right beside the slight opening of the doors. I opened my mouth to call out to my father, but the exact words I heard froze my vocal cords and anchored my feet to the floor. "We have a lot to celebrate tonight, Thomas," Derek said, his voice thick with pride. "The caterer is fully locked in, and the final deposits for the Botanical Garden venue cleared this morning. Everything is perfectly on track for the big day." Ashley let out a dramatic sigh of relief. When the designer quoted us $150,000 for the total wedding package, I thought we would have to compromise. But thanks to Daddy, everything is completely handled. I'm going to have the most flawless high society wedding this city has ever seen. I stared at the hallway wallpaper. $150,000. The number matched the exact amount of fraudulent debt on my credit report. My father had called me 2 hours ago, begging for my $40,000 life savings to cover a minor catering shortfall. Why were they celebrating a fully funded $150,000 wedding? I held my breath and leaned closer to the crack in the door. "I have to admit," Thomas Derek said, shifting to a conspiratorial tone. "I was a little concerned when you said your liquid assets were tied up, but your alternative funding strategy was brilliant. The credit approvals went through seamlessly." My father laughed proudly. "It is amazing what you can accomplish when you know exactly where to look," he said. "Harper left that entire folder of her personal tax returns and financial records in this very room 2 years ago. She has an 820 credit score and absolutely zero debt. I knew the banks would instantly approve maximum limits on platinum cards and personal loans with her clean social security number." The air completely vanished from the hallway. My lungs forgot how to expand. The thick stack of papers in my hands suddenly felt as heavy as lead. My own father, the man who had raised me. He was the faceless identity thief who had stolen my future. "It was so incredibly easy," Ashley chimed in, bubbling with cruel delight. I just sat at my laptop and filled out the applications using her information. We maxed out the platinum cards for the venue deposits and used the personal loans for the caterer and custom dress designer. She has absolutely no idea. She is probably sitting in her boring little cubicle right now, thinking she is such a responsible adult. I pressed my hand hard over my mouth to stop the violent sob rising in my throat. My knees buckled slightly. They were deliberately ruining my stability and hard-earned reputation to buy imported orchids and a custom gown. "But what happens when the first billing cycle hits?" Derek asked, sounding merely curious. "The banks will eventually start calling her when the accounts go into default. She is a corporate accountant. She is going to notice $150,000 of missing money." "Let her notice," my father said, completely devoid of paternal warmth. "By the time the massive defaults hit her credit report, the wedding will be over. Ashley will be officially married into your family, Derek. The image of our family wealth will be completely secured." Derek chuckled a cold, calculating sound. "And when the shadow inevitably defaults on the loans," he said, using my father's cruel nickname for me, "what is the official story for my parents? They cannot know my beautiful new bride comes from a family of criminals. We will control the narrative completely," Derek, my father, assured him. "When Harper defaults and starts screaming about identity theft, we will simply shake our heads and tell everyone it is a tragedy. We will say she is a bitter, financially illiterate spinster who secretly maxed out her own credit out of pure jealousy over her younger sister's perfect life. We will tell your parents she had a secret gambling problem. No one will ever believe her over us. She is just the quiet sister who owns nothing. They will just think she went crazy." Ashley giggled loudly. To the shadow, she mocked playfully, always supporting the light whether she wants to or not. To the shadow, my father and Derek echoed in unison, clinking their glasses together. I stood in the dark hallway while the warm light from the study washed over my freezing wet shoes. I could still hear the cruel sound of their laughter echoing against the wooden walls. the desperate aching need for my father's, love the pathetic desire to be a good daughter, the lifelong hope that they would eventually see my worth. All of it shattered into a million irreparable pieces in that exact moment. They actively planned to destroy my professional license, my financial future, and my personal reputation just to maintain a fake image of wealth. I did not burst into the room. A confrontation right now would only give them the opportunity to destroy the paper trail and gaslight me to my face. I needed absolute concrete proof. I needed power. I looked down at the stack of credit reports in my trembling hands. They thought I was just a naive, invisible shadow they could easily manipulate and discard. They had completely forgotten that I was a senior corporate accountant trained to hunt down hidden assets and dismantle complex financial fraud. I turned away from the study doors and walked back toward the foyer. My steps were completely silent. I opened the heavy oak front door and stepped back out into the violent storm. The freezing rain hit my face, but I did not feel the cold anymore. I only felt a pure absolute and chilling resolve. I was going to burn their perfect illusion to the ground. I stumbled blindly down the brick walkway of my parents' house, with the freezing rain plastering my hair to my face. My chest heaved with ragged, shallow gasps. I practically tore the door handle off my car and threw myself into the driver's seat. I slammed the heavy door shut, sealing myself inside the cold, dark interior of the vehicle. My hands shook so violently, I could not even fit the key into the ignition to turn on the heat. I dropped my forehead against the hard steering wheel and let out a sound that I did not even recognize. It was a raw, guttural sob of pure agony. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had just casually plotted my absolute financial ruin over glasses of expensive champagne. My own father had handed my highly protected Social Security number to a monster, just so my golden child sister could have a perfect botanical garden wedding. My lungs burned as I tried to pull in oxygen. I was having a full-blown panic attack trapped in the driveway of the criminals who raised me. Suddenly, the sharp, loud ringing of my cell phone pierced through the sound of the pouring rain. The bright screen illuminated the dark car. The caller display showed a single name: Maya. Maya was my older brother's wife. She is a stunning, brilliant African-American woman who works as a senior forensic data analyst at one of the largest global banks in the country. From the very first day she married into this toxic family, Maya was the only person who saw straight through their superficial facade. She was also the single person who ever truly saw my worth. She constantly told me I was the reliable backbone of the family, while they treated me like a disposable stepping stone. I swiped the screen with a trembling finger and lifted the phone to my ear. I could not even form a proper greeting. Only a jagged, broken breath escaped my lips. Harper Maya said, her voice instantly shifting from casual to sharp and commanding. "Harper, what is wrong? Talk to me right now." I completely broke down. The words poured out of me in a frantic, hysterical rush. I told her absolutely everything. I told her about the terrifying drop in my credit score and the $150,000 in fraudulent loans. I told her about driving to the house and standing outside the study doors in the dark hallway. I repeated the exact sickening words my father and Derek had said about letting the shadow default to cover their tracks and ruin my life. Maya did not gasp. She did not offer empty platitudes or tell me to calm down. She operated with the cold, terrifying precision of a woman who hunted financial predators for a living. "Stop crying, Harper," she ordered, her tone leaving absolutely no room for panic. "You are a senior corporate accountant, and I am a forensic data analyst. They picked the wrong women to mess with today. Give me the exact names of the banking institutions and the last 4 digits of the fraudulent account numbers from your credit report right now." I wiped my wet face with my damp sleeve and read the numbers to her from the soaked pages resting on my passenger seat. I heard the rapid, aggressive clacking of her mechanical keyboard in the background. Maya was logging into her secure banking terminal, bypassing the standard consumer firewalls to access the deep institutional data networks. "Give me exactly 3 minutes," she murmured, their voice dropping to a hyper-focused whisper. These amateur thieves always leave a digital footprint. They think they are untraceable, but they are just arrogant and incredibly sloppy. I sat in the freezing car listening to her type while the rain washed over my windshield. The heavy, crushing weight in my chest slowly began to shift from crippling despair to a terrifying sense of anticipation. "Okay," Maya finally said, her voice cutting cleanly through the tense silence. "I have the origination logs for the personal loans and the platinum credit cards. The applications were submitted online over the past 4 months. I traced the specific internet protocol addresses for every single application. They did not even bother using a virtual private network to mask their location. Every single fraudulent line of credit in your name was generated directly from the internet router registered to your father's home address." I let out a very long, shaky breath. It was the concrete, undeniable proof I desperately needed. They really did this to me. But the rhythmic clicking of Maya's keyboard did not stop. It only grew significantly faster and much more intense. "Harper?" She said, her voice suddenly sounding incredibly tense and deeply alarmed. "Harper, wait. Something is profoundly wrong here." "What is it?" I asked, feeling a brand new wave of ice-cold dread wash over my body. "This is not just about paying for a fancy wedding caterer," Maya explained, speaking very rapidly. "I am looking closely at the wire transfers pulling the funds out of these fraudulent credit accounts. Your sister and father did not route this money directly to local wedding vendors. That was a complete lie they told each other to justify the initial theft. Derek is the one controlling where this money actually goes. I tracked the routing numbers deeper into the system. Derek is actively washing the $150,000 through an intricate series of offshore shell companies. I clutched the steering wheel tighter, my mind racing to process this massive sudden escalation. Offshore shell companies. I repeated my professional accounting instincts, violently kicking into overdrive. Why would a corporate vice president need to wash stolen credit funds offshore? Because he is hiding something so much bigger, Maya replied, her voice dropping to a harsh, urgent whisper. I just cross-referenced the registration data for those offshore accounts. Harper, these shell companies are directly linked to Pierce Holdings. That is Derek's employer. Derek is not just stealing your identity to fund a wedding. He is using your pristine credit profile to wash heavily embezzled corporate funds. If the federal authorities investigate this complex money laundering scheme, the entire paper trail leads directly back to your social security number. You are not just a convenient piggy bank to them, Harper. Derek is setting you up to take the fall for a massive corporate federal crime. The cold reality of Maya's words hit me with the force of a massive freight train. Federal corporate crime. I was no longer just the convenient scapegoat for an expensive wedding. I was the designated fall guy for a massive money laundering operation. I gripped the steering wheel so hard, my hands went completely numb. The freezing rain continued to batter my windshield, but the cold outside was absolutely nothing compared to the deep ice currently flooding my veins. Maya told me to drive straight to her apartment in downtown Seattle. She promised she would have her secure servers booted up by the time I arrived. I did not go back to my own apartment. I did not stop to pack a bag or change my soaking wet clothes. I drove through the dark city streets with a singular, terrifying focus. When I walked into Maya's high-rise apartment, she was already sitting at her massive glass desk, surrounded by 3 glowing monitors. Maya is a brilliant African-American forensic data analyst who investigates complex financial syndicates for a living. She handed me a dry sweater and a large mug of black coffee, pointing to a leather chair right beside her. We did not waste time with tears or comforting hugs. The naive sister who desperately wanted her father's love had died on that front porch. The woman sitting down at that desk was a senior corporate accountant, fighting for her actual freedom. We locked the heavy doors, pulled the thick blackout blinds, and began a grueling 48-hour shadow audit that would completely dismantle the fake reality my family had built. For the next 2 days, we barely slept or ate. We lived on stale coffee and pure adrenaline. Maya used her high-level forensic clearance to trace the hidden digital pathways of the offshore accounts, while I applied my years of rigorous auditing experience to tear apart the financial ledgers line by line. We turned her sleek dining room wall into a massive physical timeline mapping every single transaction with red markers and printed banking records. I started by isolating the exact vendors my father and Derek claimed were being used for Ashley's extravagant wedding. I dug deep into the public state registration records for the luxury florist, the elite botanical caterer, and the custom dress designer. It took me less than 3 hours to realize that not a single one of these businesses actually existed. They were entirely fabricated entities. They were ghost companies, registered to empty commercial lots and abandoned post office boxes. Derek had meticulously set up these fake businesses months ago. Then he used my stolen social security number to open the massive personal loans and premium platinum credit cards. He charged those freshly minted credit lines to the maximum limits, paying his own fake vendor companies. It was a classic placement strategy used in highly sophisticated money laundering operations, but that was only the first layer of the crime. The fake vendors needed to look absolutely legitimate if the banks ever ran a standard compliance check. That meant real cash had to flow through them. This is where Maya broke through the final firewall. She tracked the incoming cash deposits hitting those fake vendor accounts. The money was not coming from my father. My father was practically bankrupt, living entirely on maxed out home equity lines. The massive cash injections flooding into the fake wedding vendors were originating from highly disguised corporate accounts belonging to Pierce Holdings. Pierce Holdings was a massive global real estate and investment firm. Derek was just a mid-level vice president there, but he walked around our family gatherings acting like he owned the entire skyscraper. Maya and I pulled his actual financial footprint using public tax records and property deeds. The truth was absolutely pathetic. Derek was completely broke. His luxury sports utility vehicle was leased under a terrible interest rate. His designer suits were bought on revolving credit. He was drowning in a mountain of personal debt. He was entirely faking his lavish lifestyle to impress my father and secure his place with Ashley. But the most sickening revelation came when we looked at the ultimate target of his massive embezzlement. Derek was not just stealing from a faceless international corporation. He was directly siphoning millions of dollars from his boss, the billionaire chief executive officer, Julian Pierce. Hearing that specific name made my blood run completely cold. Julian Pierce was not just a random billionaire. He was the exact man my sister Ashley had obsessed over for 3 entire years. Before she ever met Derek, Ashley had stalked Julian at charity galas, elite country club mixers, and exclusive high society auctions. She had bought thousands of dollars in designer dresses, trying to force an introduction and manipulate her way into his private life. She wanted the billionaire status so badly, it completely consumed her. But Julian Pierce was famously ruthless and incredibly observant. He had seen right through Ashley's shallow, manipulative facade and rejected her without a second thought. Humiliated and desperate to save face in her elite social circles, Ashley had pivoted immediately to Derek. Derek was the convenient backup plan. He worked at Julian Pierce's company, so he provided Ashley with the direct proximity to the wealth she desperately craved. Derek knew exactly what Ashley wanted, and he was actively stealing from the very billionaire who rejected her just to fund the opulent lifestyle she demanded. They were a match made in absolute hell, and they were using me as their disposable human shield. I stared at the red lines connecting the fake vendors to my stolen identity on Maya's wall. The entire trap suddenly became terrifyingly clear. It was a perfectly closed loop of financial devastation. Derek was quietly bleeding millions out of Pierce Holdings and depositing the stolen corporate funds into his fake wedding vendor accounts. He then used the heavily forged credit cards in my name to pay those exact same vendors. The stolen corporate cash was then used to pay off the credit card balances. To any automated banking system or preliminary federal auditor, it looked like I was the mastermind. It looked exactly like Harper. The senior corporate accountant was creating fake companies, opening fraudulent credit lines, and actively laundering stolen corporate funds through complex wedding expenses. Derek was washing his stolen millions and placing the entire criminal footprint squarely on my shoulders. When Julian Pierce or the federal authorities eventually noticed the missing corporate funds, the entire digital trail would lead directly to my home address and my specific social security number. Derek would walk away with clean, untraceable cash. Ashley would get her perfect high society illusion. My father would get his wealthy son-in-law, and I would take the absolute full force of a severe federal indictment. I would lose my certified public accountant license. I would lose my home. I would be sentenced to decades in federal prison for massive corporate fraud, while my family played the tragic victims who had no idea their shadow of a daughter was a criminal mastermind. They had built an inescapable cage for me. If the Federal Bureau of Investigation knocked on my door, I had absolutely no defense. The forged documents looked entirely legitimate. The paper trail was flawless. My father had handed them the exact tools they needed to destroy me. I stood in front of Maya's evidence wall, feeling a strange, profound calmness wash over me. The panic was completely gone. The desperate daughter was dead. I looked at Maya, and she looked back at me with fierce, unyielding solidarity. We could not go to the local police. If we did, Derek and my father would simply destroy the routing evidence and leave me holding the forged debt. We needed to strike higher. We needed absolute, undeniable power. We needed the one man they were both absolutely terrified of. We needed Julian Pierce. I was ready to burn their entire illusion to the ground. There was no going back now. The shadow was finally stepping out of the dark and directly into the blinding light. I stared at the red lines crisscrossing Maya's dining room wall, feeling the absolute weight of the invisible cage my father and Derek had built around me. The terrifying genius of their plan was suffocating. I turned to Maya and voiced the horrifying reality we had both just uncovered. We cannot go to the police. I said the words and felt a fresh wave of nausea hit my stomach. If I walk into a police precinct right now with these documents, I will be handing them a perfectly wrapped federal indictment against myself. The local detectives will not see a victim of complex identity theft. They will see a senior corporate accountant whose verified social security number and primary residential history are directly tied to $150,000 of fraudulent credit and millions of dollars in stolen corporate funds. Derek had meticulously engineered the digital paper trail to make me look like the ultimate mastermind. My father had supplied the exact foundational documents needed to make the forgery pass every single initial fraud check. If I tried to explain that my sister and her fiancé were setting me up to pay for a lavish botanical garden wedding, I would sound like a bitter, hysterical liar. That was exactly what Derek and my father had laughed about in the study. They knew the authorities would look at my spotless accounting background and assume I was using my professional expertise to run a massive money laundering syndicate. I would be arrested immediately. The asset freeze would hit my legitimate accounts. My firm would fire me before the sun went down. I would be buried in criminal charges while Derek quietly closed the offshore accounts and walked away clean. Maya sat back in her chair, rubbing her temples. "You are right," she said, her voice completely devoid of its usual warmth. "The moment you alert the authorities, Derek gets spooked. He deletes the routing numbers, empties the fake vendor accounts, and leaves you holding the bag for the entire operation. We need someone who can completely bypass the local police. We need someone with enough infinite resources and absolute authority to freeze the stolen corporate funds internally before Derek even realizes he has been caught." We both looked at the same printed document taped to the center of the wall, the registration file for the offshore shell company. The company stealing directly from Pierce Holdings. The company stealing from Julian Pierce. It was the most desperate, terrifying idea I had ever entertained in my entire life. Julian Pierce was a notoriously ruthless billionaire. He commanded a global real estate empire with cold, absolute precision. He was a man surrounded by layers of elite private security, expensive corporate lawyers, and impenetrable corporate firewalls. He was also the exact man my sister Ashley had spent 3 years obsessively stalking and trying to trap before she finally gave up and settled for Derek. Ashley had treated Julian Pierce like a literal prize to be won. Now I needed to treat him like my only weapon of survival. "I cannot just call his office," I told Maya, pacing across the hardwood floor. "His executive assistants will screen the call. They get hundreds of crazy phone calls a day. If I mention fraud or embezzlement over the phone, they will route me to the legal department or corporate security. Security will immediately flag Derek. Derek will know we are onto him, and he will pull the plug on the trap, destroying the evidence. So, what do you do? Maya asked, watching me closely. She knew exactly what I was thinking. She just needed me to say it out loud. I have to get inside the building. I said, my voice trembling but growing firmer with every single word. I have to walk directly into the executive suite and put these documents physically into Julian Pierce's hands. It was a completely insane plan. Pierce Holdings occupied the top 10 floors of a massive glass and steel skyscraper in the financial district. The building was a literal fortress. You needed a biometric keycard just to get past the lobby turnstiles. You needed a secondary clearance code to access the dedicated executive elevators. I was just a mid-level accountant at a different firm. I had absolutely no business being there, but I also had absolutely nothing left to lose. I was fighting for my freedom, my reputation, and my entire future. The invisible shadow my father had created was gone. I was about to become the most visible threat they had ever encountered. I went back to my apartment just as the sun was beginning to rise over the city. I did not sleep. I showered, letting the scalding hot water wash away the freezing rain and the lingering shock of the previous night. I stepped out of the bathroom and walked straight to my closet. I bypassed the dull gray cardigans and sensible flats I usually wore to blend into the background at family events. I pulled out my most expensive tailored navy blue suit, the one I only wore for high-stakes external audits when I needed to command immediate, absolute respect from hostile corporate clients. I pinned my hair back into a severe, flawless knot. I applied my makeup with cold, sharp precision. I looked in the mirror, and I did not see Ashley's sad single sister. I saw a senior forensic auditor ready to tear a multi-million-dollar company apart. I gathered the printed banking logs, the offshore routing numbers, and the fake vendor registrations Maya had compiled. I placed them inside a sleek, black leather portfolio. I took a deep breath, grabbed my professional auditing badge, and walked out the door. The Pierce Holdings building loomed over the downtown streets like a massive monument to untouchable wealth. The glass facade reflected the gray morning sky. I pushed through the heavy revolving doors and stepped into the expansive marble lobby. The air inside was completely silent and heavily conditioned. There was a massive, polished stone security desk spanning the center of the room, manned by 3 guards in dark, immaculate suits. The biometric turnstiles flashed with red indicator lights, blocking the path to the elevator banks. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, but I forced my breathing to slow down. I channeled every ounce of professional arrogance I had ever witnessed from the senior partners at my accounting firm. I walked directly up to the center security guard. I did not smile. I did not politely ask for assistance. I placed my leather portfolio heavily on the marble counter and slapped my corporate auditing badge down right next to it. I am Harper Evans, I said, my voice sharp, crisp, and entirely uncompromising. Senior External Auditor with Mitchell & Partners. I am here for the unannounced compliance review of the third quarter commercial acquisition ledgers. I need immediate access to the executive floor. The security guard blinked clearly, caught off guard by my aggressive, unapologetic entry. He looked at my badge and then down at his computer monitor. I do not have you on the expected visitor log, Ms. Evans. He said, his tone cautious but hesitant. We usually receive 24-hour advance notice for external audit teams. That is exactly why it is called an unannounced compliance review, I replied, raising one eyebrow and looking at him as if he had just asked an incredibly stupid question. The board of directors authorized this surprise audit at midnight last night due to severe, highly sensitive discrepancies found in the offshore holding accounts. I am not here to wait for clearance. I am here to secure the physical ledgers before the market opens. Now, are you going to issue me a temporary biometric pass, or do I need to call the chief financial officer and tell him the lobby security desk is actively obstructing a federal compliance mandate? I stared him down, refusing to blink. It was a massive, dangerous bluff. Mitchell & Partners did not even represent Pierce Holdings, but I used the exact corporate buzzwords that trigger immediate panic in entry-level security personnel. Federal compliance mandate, board of directors, severe discrepancies. The guard swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the senior guard standing next to him. The senior guard gave a slight, nervous nod. No one wanted to be the person responsible for obstructing a major corporate investigation. "My apologies, Ms. Evans," the first guard said quickly, typing his override credentials into the system. He pulled a temporary white keycard from a drawer and scanned it against a secure reader. "This will give you access to the 52nd floor. You will need to speak with the executive reception team to access Mr. Pierce's private suite." I snatched the card from his hand without saying thank you. I turned and walked straight through the biometric turnstiles as the glass barriers slid open with a soft, quiet chime. I did not look back. I stepped into the polished chrome elevator and swiped the temporary card. I pressed the button for the 52nd floor. The doors glided shut, sealing me inside the quiet metal box. The elevator shot upward, my stomach dropping with the rapid, intense acceleration. I had breached the first wall, but the hardest part was still ahead. The elevator doors chimed and slid apart, revealing the spectacular executive floor of Pierce Holdings. The walls were paneled in rich, dark mahogany. Original modern art hung under focused gallery lighting. The thick plush carpet absorbed the sound of my heels as I stepped out of the elevator bay. Directly ahead of me was a massive curved glass desk guarding the heavy double doors of the inner executive suite. 2 executive assistants sat behind the glass, both wearing severe designer outfits and headsets. I gripped my black leather portfolio so tightly, my fingers ached. I walked straight toward the glass desk, moving with absolute, undeniable purpose. I did not slow down. I did not hesitate. I was no longer the shadow my father had created. I was the financial storm that was going to destroy everything Derek had built, and I was fully prepared to break down whatever doors stood in my way. I marched directly up to the curved glass desk. The 2 executive assistants immediately stood up, their perfectly manicured hands reaching for their desk phones. "May I help you?" one of them asked, her voice dripping with the kind of corporate condescension I had endured my entire life. I did not break my stride. I told her I was Harper Evans, an external auditor, and I needed to see Julian Pierce immediately regarding an urgent compliance breach. The assistant let out a dry, dismissive laugh and informed me that Mr. Pierce did not take unannounced meetings with mid-level accountants. She pressed a button on her console. Within seconds, the heavy mahogany doors at the end of the hall swung open, and 2 massive private security guards stepped out. They moved toward me with terrifying speed. I felt a cold spike of pure panic in my chest, but I anchored my feet to the thick carpet. I was not leaving. The commotion drew exactly the attention I needed. The glass door to the corner office opened, and Julian Pierce walked out. He looked exactly like the man my sister had obsessively stalked for 3 years. He was tall, wearing a bespoke dark suit that practically radiated untouchable wealth and ruthless authority. His face was entirely unreadable, a mask of cold, absolute control. He surveyed the chaotic scene in his reception area with deep annoyance. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice quiet but carrying a weight that made the entire room freeze. One of the security guards grabbed my arm, his grip bruising my skin. "She breached the lobby, Mr. Pierce," the guard said respectfully. "We are removing her from the premises right now." Julian Pierce looked at me for a fraction of a second. His eyes swept over my tailored navy suit and my tightly pinned hair, dismissing me instantly as a minor nuisance. "Get her out of here," he ordered, turning his back to return to his office. The guard yanked my arm, pulling me toward the elevator. My window of opportunity was rapidly closing. I ripped my arm out of his grasp with violent force. I did not scream hysterically. I projected my voice with the cold, commanding precision of a woman who held the absolute truth. I shouted 3 specific numbers. Cayman Roding 048, Seychelles Holding 927, Isle of Man Corporate Trust 551. Julian Pierce stopped dead in his tracks. His hand was resting on the brass handle of his office door. The entire reception area went completely silent. The security guards froze, waiting for his command. Julian turned slowly around. The cold annoyance on his face had completely vanished, replaced by a sharp, terrifying intensity. He looked directly at me, his dark eyes locking onto mine. Those were highly classified offshore holding accounts. Only his elite inner circle and his highest-level executives even knew those numbers existed. "Let her go," Julian commanded softly, The security guards instantly backed away. He gestured toward his open office door. "Bring your documents inside, Ms. Evans." I walked past the stunned assistants and stepped into his massive private office. The walls were lined with books, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying view of the Seattle skyline. Julian closed the heavy door behind us, sealing us in absolute silence. He did not offer me a seat. He walked behind his massive marble desk and leaned forward, resting his hands on the surface. "You have exactly 60 seconds to explain how a random accountant knows the routing numbers to my private corporate holding accounts," he said, his tone laced with a lethal threat. "If I do not like your answer, my security team will not just escort you out. They will hand you directly to the federal authorities." I did not flinch. I walked right up to his desk, opened my black leather portfolio, and spread the printed banking logs across the marble surface. "I am not your enemy, Mr. Pierce," I said, my voice completely steady. "I am the woman who just caught your vice president stealing $2.4 million from your company." Julian looked down at the documents. His eyes scanned the highlighted routing numbers and the fake vendor registrations. I explained the entire intricate money laundering operation with rapid, ruthless efficiency. I showed him how Derek had fabricated the elite wedding vendors. I mapped out how the stolen corporate funds were funneled into those ghost companies. I laid out the forged credit reports, proving how Derek had stolen my social security number to create a massive wall of fraudulent debt, washing the embezzled cash and perfectly framing me for the entire federal crime. Julian's expression darkened with profound fury as he traced the digital pathways I had mapped out. "Derek is an arrogant fool," he murmured, staring at the undeniable proof of the embezzlement. "But why would he use stolen corporate funds to pay local event planners?" "Because he is completely broke," I answered, my voice hardened with cold, absolute clarity. "And because he is marrying my sister Ashley. He is using your money to fund a $150,000 botanical garden wedding so he can maintain the illusion of massive wealth." Julian looked up at me, a sudden flash of recognition hitting his eyes. "Ashley." He repeated the name with deep disgust. "The woman who spent 3 years crashing my charity galas trying to manufacture a relationship." "Yes," I said evenly. "She wanted your billionaire status, Mr. Pierce. When you completely rejected her, she settled for a man who worked for you. Derek knew he could never give her the elite high society life she demanded on his actual salary, so he decided to steal it directly from you. And they decided to use the quiet, invisible sister to take the absolute fall for the entire operation." Julian Pierce stared at me for a long, unbroken moment. The furious anger in his eyes slowly shifted into something entirely different. It was deep, profound respect. He looked at the flawless forensic audit I had compiled in less than 48 hours. He realized that the woman standing in front of him was not some naive victim crying for help. I had unraveled a highly sophisticated multi-million-dollar corporate embezzlement scheme that his own elite internal security team had completely missed. My father had called me a useless shadow my entire life, but Julian Pierce, a billionaire who judged every single person by their absolute capability, looked at me and saw a brilliant, razor-sharp mind. "You did not come here to just hand me this evidence," he said quietly, circling his desk, to stand directly in front of me. "If you go to the police right now, Derek will destroy the routing keys and you will be arrested for the forged credit debt. You came here because you need my resources to trap him before he realizes he has been caught." I looked the billionaire straight in the eye. "I came here because we have a mutual enemy, Mr. Pierce," I said. "Derek and my family tried to burn my life to the ground. I need your absolute power to ensure that when the fire starts, they are the only ones trapped inside." Julian Pierce smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile that promised absolute destruction. "Ms. Evans," he said softly, "I think you and I are going to work very well together." Julian Pierce moved with the sudden, violent energy of a man who was entirely unaccustomed to being stolen from. He did not say another word to me. He simply reached across the expansive surface of his dark marble desk and picked up a secure private telephone. His eyes were completely cold-focused, entirely on the undeniable proof of the embezzlement I had just laid out before him. He punched in a short extension and commanded his director of global security to immediately lock down the building. Then he looked at me and stated his intention to contact his personal liaisons at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He promised that Derek would be escorted out of the building in handcuffs before the afternoon was over. I did not hesitate. I lunged forward, across the desk, and slammed my hand down hard over the receiver, physically cutting off the line. Julian froze. The silence in the massive office became instantly heavy and suffocating. He looked down at my hand covering his telephone, and then slowly raised his dark, piercing eyes to meet mine. I could see the dangerous, unyielding authority radiating from him. No one in his entire corporate empire would ever dare to physically interrupt him. But I was fighting for my actual life, and I absolutely refused to back down. "You cannot call the authorities yet," I said, my voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. "If you bring the federal agents into this building right now, you will absolutely destroy my only chance at survival." Julian slowly placed the phone back onto its cradle, never breaking eye contact with me. He leaned back in his leather executive chair, crossing his arms over his chest. "Explain," he demanded with a quiet, terrifying calmness. "I am looking at definitive proof that a mid-level vice president is actively draining millions of dollars from my holding accounts. Give me one logical reason why I should not have him arrested this exact second." "Because he has perfectly framed me," I replied, matching his steady tone. I leaned forward, resting my palms on the cool marble, placing myself directly in his space. If the authorities walk in today, Derek will instantly know the security breach has been discovered. He will panic. He will remotely wipe the offshore servers and completely erase the digital pathways connecting him to the stolen money. And when the federal agents trace the remaining financial footprints, they will not find Derek. They will find my pristine social security number attached to $150,000 of deeply fraudulent credit debt. They will find that those exact credit lines were used to wash your stolen corporate funds. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to maintain absolute professional composure. My father, Thomas, possesses the physical documents used to forge my identity. He keeps them locked in a safe inside his private study. If Derek calls my father and tells him the scheme has collapsed, my father will burn those files immediately. The only physical evidence proving my innocence will turn to ash. The local police and the federal investigators will look at my extensive background as a senior corporate accountant. They will see a woman with the exact financial expertise required to execute a sophisticated money laundering operation. They will arrest me, Mr. Pierce. I will go to federal prison for a crime I did not commit, and Derek will walk away entirely free. Julian absorbed my words in complete silence. His sharp analytical mind was visibly processing the complex, multi-layered trap my family had constructed. He looked down at the highlighted banking logs and then back up at me. He was truly seeing me. He was not looking at me with the dismissive arrogance he had shown in the reception area. He was studying my face, my posture, my absolute refusal to be intimidated by his immense wealth and power. "Your own father engineered this," Julian asked, his voice carrying a sudden note of profound disbelief. "He willingly handed over your sensitive personal data to completely destroy your future just to fund a wedding." "Yes," I answered, feeling a familiar sting of betrayal, but refusing to let it break my focus. "He has always called me the Shadow. I am just the reliable, invisible sister in the background. My entire purpose in that family is to sacrifice my own stability so that my younger sister Ashley can shine. Ashley demands an opulent high society lifestyle, and Derek is desperate to provide it for her. They are using my clean financial reputation as a disposable shield to protect their stolen wealth." Julian let out a low, dark laugh that sent a shiver down my spine. "Ashley," he repeated, saying my sister's name with a mixture of amusement and absolute disgust. He stood up from his chair and began to slowly pace the length of the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the Seattle skyline. "Your sister spent the better part of a year trying to manufacture a relationship with me. She orchestrated accidental meetings at my charity galas. She bribed country club staff to find out my weekend golf schedule. She practically threw herself at me, hoping to secure a billionaire lifestyle." He stopped pacing and turned to face me, his dark eyes locking onto mine with an intense, burning focus. I rejected her instantly. He continued, his voice smooth and incredibly sharp. She was entirely vacant. She was a shiny, empty shell driven by nothing but vanity and superficial greed. I saw right through her desperate performance. I assumed her entire family shared that exact same pathetic lack of substance. But looking at you right now, I realize how entirely wrong I was. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly charged. The dynamic between us was shifting rapidly, evolving from a hostile confrontation into a powerful, unspoken alignment. Julian Pierce, a man who commanded global markets and intimidated seasoned executives, was looking at me with genuine, unmasked admiration. For 28 years, my family had conditioned me to believe I was small, uninteresting, and completely forgettable. But standing in this billionaire suite, I felt an undeniable magnetic pull. Julian did not see a shadow. He saw a brilliant forensic auditor who had managed to track down a highly disguised multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme in less than 48 hours. He saw an equal. "So, what is your proposal?" Julian asked, closing the distance between us until he was standing just inches away from the edge of the desk. "How do we dismantle this operation without sending you to federal prison?" "I need exactly 14 days," I told him, holding his intense gaze without wavering. "The wedding is scheduled to take place in exactly 2 weeks. I need that time to systematically lock every single door they have left open. My sister-in-law, Maya, is a forensic data analyst. Together, we are going to build an inescapable digital fence around Derek's offshore accounts. But I need your absolute cooperation, and I need access to your elite corporate legal team." Julian crossed his arms, studying me closely. 14 days is a massive risk, Harper. Derek could attempt to move another $1 million before the wedding. He is actively bleeding my company. "He will not move the funds yet," I countered, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. "The final massive payments for the botanical garden venue and the luxury caterers are not scheduled to clear until the day before the ceremony. Derek is holding the bulk of the stolen cash in the offshore accounts, waiting for the final moment to wash it through my forged credit lines. We let him initiate the final wire transfer. We wait until the exact second the money moves into the domestic accounts, and then we strike. We freeze every single asset simultaneously. We blindside them when they are completely surrounded by their wealthy guests and absolutely convinced they have won." Julian tilted his head, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his striking face. "You do not just want to stop him," he observed, his voice dropping to a low, admiring rumble. "You want to absolutely annihilate them. You want to publicly destroy the fake reality they built using your stolen future. They tried to bury me in the dark." "Mr. Pierce," I said, my voice perfectly steady but laced with a cold, ruthless edge. "I am simply going to drag them out into the blinding light, but I need your word that you will hold off the federal authorities until the day of the wedding. I need to play the part of the submissive, obedient daughter for 2 more weeks. I need them to feel completely safe. If you give me 14 days, I will hand you Derek along with every single dollar he stole, completely wrapped up in a flawless, irrefutable paper trail." Julian reached across the desk. He did not reach for the telephone this time. He reached for my hand. His grip was firm, warm, and incredibly powerful. I felt a sudden electric jolt travel up my arm, confirming the intense, silent chemistry that had been building between us since the moment I walked into his office. "You have your 14 days, Harper," he said, his voice thick with absolute conviction and a dark, thrilling promise. "We will build this trap together. And when the wedding day arrives, I will personally stand by your side as you tear their entire world apart." I squeezed his hand, sealing our secret partnership. The invisible shadow was officially dead. I was walking out of that skyscraper with a billionaire ally, a flawless plan of attack, and a burning desire to deliver the most devastating justice my family had ever seen. The following Saturday, I walked into the diamond room at the elite downtown country club for Ashley's bridal shower. I wore a plain beige dress that my mother had specifically picked out for me because she said it would not distract from Ashley's radiant glow. I carried a heavy silver tray of custom imported crystal champagne flutes, serving the guests just like a hired waitress. Ashley was seated on a massive velvet chair, surrounded by her wealthy socialite friends, opening gifts that cost more than my monthly rent. Every time I approached her circle, the conversation deliberately dropped to a hushed whisper, followed by sharp, condescending laughter. Ashley made a massive show of handing me her empty glass without even looking at my face. She told me to fetch her another mimosa and commanded me loudly to try not to spill it this time. She announced to the entire room that everyone knew how clumsy I got when I was intimidated by nice things. Her friends erupted into polite, synchronized giggles, mocking my quiet demeanor and my sensible shoes. I smiled a soft, blank, accommodating smile and nodded respectfully. I took her empty glass and walked back toward the serving station. My father Thomas was standing near the entrance, greeting the fathers of the bridesmaids and the wealthy relatives of the groom. When he saw me carrying the tray, he pulled me aside, his grip tight and punishing on my upper arm. He leaned in close, his voice a harsh, low hiss. He told me to look at my sister building a dynasty and securing our family legacy. He told me I was 28 years old, completely alone, working a sad, single, working-class life, and complaining about a measly $40,000 loan. He said I should be taking notes so I would not end up a bitter spinster. I looked down at the marble floor, playing the exact part he expected me to play. I forced my shoulders to slump, making my eyes look wide and deeply apologetic. I told him I was sorry and that I was just trying to be helpful. He scoffed and released my arm, brushing his suit jacket as if touching me had soiled the expensive fabric. He ordered me to just stay out of the way. I walked into the private restroom and locked the heavy wooden door behind me. The moment the lock clicked, my defeated posture instantly vanished. I stood up, perfectly straight, and pulled my secure, encrypted cell phone from my pocket. I had exactly 12 minutes before my mother would send someone to find me to cut the elaborate cake. I initiated a secure conference call. Maya answered on the first ring, and Julian Pierce's lead corporate attorney joined a second later. We did not waste time with pleasantries because the trap needed to be absolutely flawless. Maya had spent the last 48 hours digging into the exact collateral my father used to secure the massive fraudulent loans Derek had orchestrated. My father had been incredibly arrogant and phenomenally stupid. To secure the bridge loans quickly and avoid extensive underwriting delays, he had quietly put up our childhood home as collateral. He completely owned the property outright, but he signed the deed over to a secondary predatory lending firm to guarantee the cash flow for the fake wedding vendors. Maya had isolated the specific debt portfolio holding my father's mortgage. Julian Pierce's legal team had swooped in with absolute corporate precision. They used a discreet subsidiary holding company to aggressively buy up that exact block of debt from the secondary lender. The transaction was highly classified and completely untraceable to me or Julian. I stood in front of the ornate bathroom mirror, listening to the lead attorney confirm the final wire transfers. The attorney stated clearly that the debt acquisition was complete and my father's property was no longer held by the original lender. The subsidiary we controlled now owned the entire note. They had drafted the specific assignment documents, transferring the absolute legal rights of that debt directly into my personal trust. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, watching a cold, terrifying smile spread across my face. I asked what that meant in practical terms, wanting to hear the absolute confirmation out loud. Maya chimed in, her voice vibrating with fierce triumph, explaining that my father effectively handed the keys to his house to a predatory lender, and Julian just bought that lender. As of this morning, I was the sole legal owner of my father's debt. If that loan defaulted, I had the absolute legal right to foreclose on the property and evict him immediately. I owned the house. I owned all of it. The gravity of what we had just accomplished settled into my bones. My father had spent his entire life making me feel like a worthless guest in my own family. He had just threatened to leave me bankrupt and homeless, and now, while he stood in the next room bragging to his wealthy friends about his brilliant legacy, I secretly held the absolute power to throw him out onto the street. I told the attorney to finalize the assignment documents and prepare the formal eviction notices. I wanted the paperwork printed on heavy official stock and completely ready for the wedding day. I ended the call, slipped the phone back into my pocket, and smoothed the front white of my plain beige dress. I unlocked the bathroom door and walked back out into the lavish party, carrying my serving tray and wearing the perfect invisible mask of the obedient shadow. The psychological torture escalated exponentially over the next 10 days, but the secret knowledge I held acted like an impenetrable shield. I attended every single tedious wedding event, playing my part flawlessly. I went to the final dress fitting where my mother made me sit in the corner while she wept over Ashley's custom imported silk gown. I attended the floral arrangement viewing where Derek loudly bragged about the rare orchids he was supposedly importing from South America. I knew those orchids did not exist. I knew the money was currently sitting in a frozen offshore holding account, legally trapped by Julian's corporate security team. But I just smiled and nodded, offering empty compliments while recording every single lie they told. At a high-end dinner party later that week, my father gave a toast praising Derek for his massive corporate success and his incredible generosity. My father looked directly at me across the table and told the guests that some people in the family were content with a sad, working-class life, but Ashley always knew she deserved the absolute best. He said it was a shame I could not find a man to take care of me the way Derek took care of Ashley. The guests murmured in polite agreement, giving me pitying looks. I slowly chewed my food, feeling the incredible weight of the eviction notice sitting inside my briefcase back at home. I did not defend myself. I let them dig their graves deeper with every single arrogant word they spoke. The ultimate test of my restraint came the afternoon of the wedding rehearsal. We were gathered at the massive botanical garden venue. The event planners were rushing around setting up hundreds of white chairs on the pristine lawn. Derek arrived looking incredibly smug, wearing a tailored suit and a luxury watch he had undoubtedly purchased with stolen corporate funds. He spotted me standing near the floral archways and walked over with a predatory grin on his face. He leaned in close, his expensive cologne masking the absolute stench of his rotting lies. He told me I had been awfully quiet lately, and he thought I would still be throwing a tantrum about my little savings account. He warned me not to ruin Ashley's rehearsal dinner tonight with my miserable attitude. He sneered that my sad single life was embarrassing the family, and I needed to learn my place. I looked up at him, maintaining a perfectly blank expression. I told him I was just trying to be supportive, and I knew exactly how much he had invested in this illusion. He chuckled darkly, completely missing the double meaning of my words. He told me that if I stepped out of line, he would personally ensure my father cut me out of the family forever. He said I was lucky they even let me stand at the altar, and I should try to look grateful. He patted my shoulder in a deeply patronizing gesture and walked away to join Ashley, who was busy screaming at a terrified event coordinator. I watched them together, the fake executive and the cruel golden child completely oblivious to the massive guillotine currently hanging directly over their heads. I did not feel a single drop of pity for them. They had built their entire lives on exploiting innocent people, and they had fundamentally underestimated the quiet girl in the background. My phone buzzed silently in my pocket. It was a secure text message from Julian Pierce. The message stated that the final financial trap was locked. I read the words and felt a profound sense of absolute power wash through my veins. The forged credit lines had been fully monitored. The stolen corporate millions were completely secure. The deed to my father's house was sitting in a manila folder on my kitchen counter. I had spent 28 years trying to earn a place at their table. Tomorrow, I was going to flip the entire table over and watch them scramble for the crumbs. I put my phone away and walked gracefully toward the rehearsal dinner, smiling brightly at the people who were about to lose absolutely everything. When the rehearsal dinner began that evening, the grand ballroom was filled with the elite members of Derek's supposed social circle. My mother had arranged the seating chart, so I was placed at a small table near the kitchen doors, entirely separated from the main wedding party. I sat with distant cousins who ignored me and elderly relatives who asked condescending questions about my lack of a husband. Throughout the dinner, my father stood up multiple times to give speeches about the merging of two powerful families. He toasted to Derek's incredible financial acumen and Ashley's flawless grace. He deliberately pointed toward my table in the back and told a cruel joke about how every family needs one person to stay behind and balance the checkbooks while the real stars shine. The room erupted into laughter. I gently placed my napkin on my lap and took a slow sip of my water. I watched my sister beam with pride as she kissed Derek's cheek. I watched my father puff out his chest, completely intoxicated by the illusion of his own manufactured wealth. They had absolutely no idea that while they were clinking their expensive champagne glasses, I was receiving real-time updates from Maya on my phone under the table. Maya was confirming that the secondary lender had officially processed the transfer of the deed. The county records were currently updating to reflect my personal trust as the sole legal owner of the property. The predatory loans my father had taken out were now entirely my property. The fraudulent credit lines Derek had opened in my name were fully documented and categorized by Julian's legal team, ready to be handed directly to the federal authorities the moment the sun came up. Every single mocking laugh, every cruel joke, every condescending glance they threw my way only cemented my resolve. I sat in the back of the room, cloaked in my plain dress and my quiet demeanor perfectly executing the role of the submissive shadow they demanded. I ate my dinner in silence. I smiled when they looked at me. I offered polite applause at the end of every insulting speech. I gave them absolutely nothing to fear and everything to lose. The night dragged on with relentless displays of their fake superiority, but I remained perfectly composed. I knew the storm was coming tomorrow, and I was the one holding the lightning. The morning before the wedding felt completely disconnected from reality. While my sister Ashley was likely indulging in a lavish spa treatment, and my father Thomas was practicing his arrogant father of the bride speech, I was standing inside a heavily secured corporate war room on the 52nd floor of Pierce Holdings. The room was bathed in the cool blue light of massive digital monitors. Maya sat at the center console, her fingers hovering over the keyboard with the lethal grace of a predator waiting to strike. Julian Pierce stood right beside me, his presence an unyielding pillar of absolute authority. We had spent the last 13 days setting the invisible tripwires and sealing the legal perimeters. Now, we just had to wait for Derek to walk directly into the snare. The final massive payments for the botanical garden venue, the elite catering, and the imported floral arrangements were due by noon today. Derek had strategically waited until the absolute last minute to move the bulk of the embezzled corporate funds. He thought he was being incredibly clever. He believed that moving the money just hours before the wedding ceremony would prevent any internal corporate audits from flagging the massive sudden withdrawal. He was so blindingly arrogant, he never stopped to consider that the chief executive officer he was stealing from was currently standing shoulder to shoulder with the disposable shadow he was trying to frame. The digital clock on Maya's monitor ticked over to 10 in the morning. The silence in the room was so thick, it felt like physical pressure against my chest. Julian stared at the primary screen, his jaw locked tight in a display of cold, restrained fury. Every single second that passed was another reminder of how deeply Derek had violated his trust and abused his company. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing alert tone echoed through the sterile room. A bright red notification flared across Maya's center monitor. My breath caught in my throat. Derek was making his move. Maya leaned forward, her eyes scanning the rapidly scrolling lines of encrypted data. She announced that Derek had just initiated a massive wire transfer from the Pierce Holdings secondary commercial acquisition account. He was attempting to move exactly $2 million. My stomach plummeted at the sheer audacity of the number. $2 million. He was not just covering the remaining $150,000 in fraudulent wedding expenses. He was using the chaos of the wedding weekend to completely drain the corporate account and stash the remaining millions into his personal offshore havens. He was planning to walk down the aisle a freshly minted millionaire, leaving me to face a devastating federal indictment before the honeymoon was even over. Maya narrated his digital movements in real time, her voice perfectly steady despite the massive stakes. She watched the $2 million leave the Pierce Holdings server and bounce through the initial masking protocols. Derek was routing the massive sum through a fake vendor shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, attempting to completely scrub the corporate digital footprint. From there, he initiated the final automated sequence. He directed the clean, untraceable money to hit the fraudulent platinum credit accounts he had illegally opened using my stolen social security number. He was using my pristine financial identity as the final wash cycle for $2 million in stolen corporate wealth. If that money successfully landed in those accounts, my name would be permanently cemented to a massive federal crime. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched the red digital progress bar slowly fill across the monitor. Now, Julian commanded, his voice slicing through the tension like a blade. Maya hit the execution sequence we had meticulously programmed over the past 2 weeks. She did not just block the transfer. If she had simply blocked it, Derek would have instantly received a failed transaction alert and panicked, destroying the physical evidence back at my father's house. Instead, Maya completely hijacked the routing destination mid-transit. Using the absolute administrative authority granted directly by Julian Pierce and the forensic backdoors she had secretly established, Maya captured the $2 million wire the exact microsecond it hit the International Clearinghouse. She digitally severed Derek's control over the transaction and rerouted the entire massive sum directly into a heavily fortified, locked corporate escrow account controlled exclusively by Julian's lead federal attorneys. Derek would see a pending processing notification on his end. He would assume the international banking protocols were simply taking their standard 24 hours to clear the massive sum. He would have absolutely no idea that the money had never actually reached my forged credit accounts. He would have no idea that the $2 million was now legally frozen, trapped in a secure legal vault that he could never access again. The fraudulent credit cards carrying the $150,000 in wedding debt remained completely unpaid. Derek had just finalized his extravagant wedding contracts using empty accounts that were about to severely and violently default. We had successfully amputated his stolen financial lifeline without triggering a single alarm. The operation was a flawless total success. The massive blue monitors flashed green, confirming the funds were completely locked and secure. I let out a long, trembling breath, leaning my hands against the cool metal edge of the conference table. The crushing, terrifying weight of the fraudulent debt that had been suffocating me for weeks finally began to lift. Julian stepped closer to me, the hard, rigid lines of his face softening into a look of profound respect. He told me it was done, and that Derek had officially sealed his own fate. But the financial interception was only the first half of our devastating trap. We needed to ensure that when the federal authorities inevitably descended, the legal narrative was already set in stone and completely bulletproof. Julian's lead corporate litigator walked into the room carrying a thick stack of formal legal documents printed on heavy official paper. These were the sworn federal affidavits we had spent days quietly drafting. I sat down at the heavy mahogany table and picked up a black pen. I read through the dense legal text detailing every single aspect of Derek's identity theft and the massive money laundering scheme. I swore under penalty of perjury that my social security number had been stolen by my father Thomas and utilized by Derek to facilitate corporate embezzlement. I attached the verified internet protocol logs Maya had captured, proving the fraudulent loans were originated directly from my father's residential router. I attached the secondary mortgage documents, proving my father had recklessly collateralized his own home to secure Derek's initial bridge loans. And finally, I attached the deed transfer, proving I was now the sole legal owner of my father's predatory debt. I signed my name with sharp, decisive strokes. I was legally completely immunizing myself against the impending federal fallout. Julian Pierce sat down directly beside me and signed his own massive stack of sworn corporate statements. He officially documented Derek's $2 million embezzlement and formally authorized a complete, devastating federal prosecution against his own vice president. Watching a billionaire systematically dismantle the man who had tried to destroy me filled me with an indescribable sense of validation. For my entire life, my parents had treated me like a useless burden. Now the most powerful man in the city was sitting beside me, treating me as his absolute equal, and relying on my forensic accounting expertise to save his corporate empire. We pushed the signed documents across the table to the waiting legal team. The attorneys immediately notarized the signatures and locked the affidavits inside a secure briefcase. They would hand-deliver the entire airtight package to the regional director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation at exactly 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. The exact same time, my sister Ashley was scheduled to walk down the aisle. The snare was now completely set and heavily armed. Derek was walking around the city making final wedding preparations, absolutely convinced he was a mastermind who had successfully outsmarted a global corporate empire. My father was likely at his country club, buying expensive rounds of drinks, boasting about his powerful new son-in-law, and mocking his invisible working-class daughter. They thought they had perfectly orchestrated my total financial ruin. They had no idea they were dancing on top of a massive live landmine that was fully primed to detonate the moment they said their wedding vows. I stood up from the conference table, feeling a sudden powerful surge of cold, righteous energy flowing through my veins. Julian looked at me, his dark eyes shining with intense, dangerous anticipation. He asked me if I was ready for tomorrow. I thought about the decades of emotional abuse, the relentless belittling, the way my mother had always looked right through me, the way my father had casually offered my life as a sacrificial lamb for Ashley's vanity. I thought about the fake floral vendors, the stolen millions, the disgusting rehearsal dinner jokes, and the sheer arrogant cruelty of the people who shared my blood. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored navy suit and met the billionaire's gaze with a steady, unbreakable stare. "I am completely ready," I told him, my voice ringing with absolute chilling certainty. They wanted a high society wedding they will never forget, and tomorrow we are going to give them exactly what they deserve. The rehearsal dinner took place inside the grand glass atrium of the City Botanical Garden, and it was a masterclass in manufactured perfection. The massive vaulted glass ceiling revealed a clear night sky, blanketed in stars, but the real spectacle was happening down on the floor. My mother had spared absolutely no expense for her golden child. Thousands of white orchids draped over the entrance archways, and hundreds of floating candles cast a warm golden glow across the imported silk tablecloths. The air smelled of expensive perfume, roasted prime rib, and the undeniable scent of absolute arrogance. A string quartet played a soft classical melody in the corner, while waiters in crisp white uniforms glided silently between the tables, pouring champagne that cost $300 a bottle. It was exactly the kind of elite high society event Ashley had demanded her entire life. It was also entirely funded by massive federal crimes. I sat at table number 9, which was strategically tucked away in the back corner right next to the swinging kitchen doors. My mother had placed me with 3 elderly great-aunts who were practically deaf and 2 distant cousins who spent the entire evening scrolling on their phones. I wore the plain beige dress my mother had handed me 2 days ago with strict instructions not to wear anything that might pull focus from Ashley's radiant bridal glow. I blended into the beige wallpaper perfectly. I was the obedient, invisible shadow, just like I had always been. But as I sat there, taking small sips of my ice water, I felt a deep, thrilling power vibrating in my chest. I looked around the room at the wealthy guests laughing and celebrating, completely unaware that the entire evening was paid for by the fraudulent credit lines Derek had illegally opened in my name. They were drinking champagne bought with stolen corporate funds directly embezzled from Julian Pierce. I knew the truth, and I knew the trap was already locked. The clinking of a silver knife against a crystal flute echoed through the massive atrium. The soft chatter slowly died down as the guests turned their attention toward the head table. My father Thomas stood up. He buttoned his tailored suit jacket and looked out over the crowd with a smug, deeply satisfied smile. He was in his element, surrounded by the illusion of dynasty and legacy. "Thank you all for being here tonight." My father began, his voice booming confidently through the microphone. "We are gathered to celebrate the merging of 2 incredible families. When I look at Ashley and Derek, I see the absolute pinnacle of success. I see drive, I see ambition, and I see a future that will elevate our family name for generations to come. Derek, you have proven yourself to be a brilliant financial mind. Your massive success at Pierce Holdings is a testament to your relentless work ethic. You are the son I always wanted, and I am incredibly proud to welcome you into this family." The guests erupted into warm applause. Ashley placed a manicured hand over her heart and beamed at Derek. Derek smiled modestly, raising his glass to my father. It was sickening. Derek was a mid-level vice president, drowning in personal debt and actively stealing millions from his boss. But my father had completely bought into the illusion. My father waited for the applause to fade before continuing. He took a sip of his champagne and his eyes began to scan the room. I knew exactly what was coming. I felt my spine stiffen. His gaze passed over the wealthy executives and the elite socialites before finally landing on my table in the dark corner. Of course, my father said, a patronizing smile spreading across his face. We also have to acknowledge the unsung heroes of the family, the quiet ones. Harper, please stand up. My stomach plummeted, but I forced my legs to move. I stood up in my plain beige dress, feeling 300 pairs of eyes instantly lock onto me. The silence in the room suddenly felt incredibly heavy and incredibly judgmental. Let us give a round of applause for Harper, my father said, his voice dripping with condescending pity. While Ashley and Derek are out conquering the corporate world and building a massive legacy, Harper is holding down the fort. Every family needs a solid, dependable background character. Harper is 28 years old, and she is still figuring out how to be useful in this world. She is working her quiet little accounting job, trying to find her footing. She might not have Ashley's stunning grace or Derek's incredible wealth, but she is always just there. Maybe one day, Harper, you will learn a thing or two from your little sister about how to actually succeed. But until then, we appreciate you keeping the checkbook balanced. Let us toast to Harper, the shadow who makes the light look so much brighter. The room erupted into polite, synchronized laughter. I saw women covering their mouths to hide their giggles. I saw men shaking their heads with pitying smiles. Ashley looked at me from the head table, her eyes gleaming with pure, malicious triumph. She mouthed the word pathetic before taking a sip of her champagne. I stood there in the center of the massive room, absorbing the absolute maximum force of my father's public humiliation. My hands were shaking at my sides, but I forced my face into a perfect mask of embarrassed submission. I bowed my head slightly, offering a weak, apologetic smile to the crowd. I sat back down as the guests quickly turned their attention away from the sad working-class sister and back to the glowing, golden couple. I stared at the white tablecloth, letting the cruelty wash over me, because I knew something they did not know. I knew that my father was currently living in a house that I fully owned. I knew the deed to his property was legally transferred into my personal trust. I knew that Derek was about to face a massive federal indictment tomorrow morning. I let them laugh because this was the absolute last night they would ever feel superior to me. After the speeches concluded, the formal dinner transitioned into a lively cocktail hour. The string quartet picked up the tempo and guests began moving toward the open bars and the outdoor terrace. I wanted to avoid any further conversations with my pitying relatives, so I quietly slipped out a side door and walked down a dark stone pathway that wound through the botanical gardens. The cool night air felt incredibly refreshing against my heated skin. I pulled my phone from my pocket, checking a secure message from Maya, confirming the digital trap was still flawlessly holding the $2 million in escrow. Harper. The harsh, aggressive whisper cut through the peaceful silence of the garden. I turned around and saw Derek marching down the stone pathway toward me. The charming, modest groom facade he had worn during dinner was completely gone. His face was flushed red with alcohol and raw panic. He moved with a sudden, violent energy, closing the distance between us until he was standing just inches away from me. He smelled heavily of expensive bourbon and desperate sweat. "What kind of stupid game are you playing?" he demanded, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. I took a calculated step back, pulling my shoulders inward to look small and intimidated. "I have no idea what you are talking about, Derek," I said, keeping my voice quiet and shaky. "Do not lie to me, you pathetic shadow," he hissed, grabbing my upper arm and squeezing hard enough to bruise. "The $40,000. The wire transfer your father told you to send from your life savings to cover the final catering vendor. It bounced. The transaction was completely denied by your bank. I checked the offshore vendor routing portal 10 minutes ago. The money did not clear." My mind raced, but my face remained perfectly terrified. I knew exactly why the $40,000 had bounced. Maya and Julian's legal team had completely frozen all the accounts associated with the fraudulent vendors. Derek was trying to pull my legitimate life savings into his money laundering cycle, and the secure firewalls had rejected the transfer. "I sent it. I stammered, forcing a slight tremor into my voice. I swear, Derek, I went to the bank yesterday and signed the wire transfer documents. The teller said it would process by this afternoon. There must be a glitch in the system. A glitch. Derek sneered, his grip tightening on my arm. You listen to me very carefully, Harper. That $40,000 was supposed to cover the final placement fee. Without that specific cash injection, the entire vendor payment structure stalls. If that money is not sitting in the designated account by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, the Botanical Garden Management team is going to lock the gates and cancel the entire ceremony. This was a complete lie. The venue had already been paid using the fraudulent credit cards he opened in my name. Derek was just desperate to steal my actual life savings before the wedding was over. He wanted every last dime he could extract from me to pad his personal offshore accounts. I am sorry, I whimpered, letting a single tear fall down my cheek. I will call the bank the second they open tomorrow. I will fix it, I promise. You are damn right you will fix it. Derek growled, leaning his face so close to mine I could feel his hot breath on my skin. Because if that money is not wired by 8 in the morning, I am going straight to Thomas. I am going to tell your father that his jealous, bitter spinster of a daughter deliberately sabotaged Ashley's perfect wedding out of pure spite. I will tell him you canceled the wire transfer because you cannot stand seeing your sister happy. He already thinks you are a useless embarrassment, Harper. If I tell him you ruined this day, he will not just yell at you. He will completely disown you. He will cut you out of the family trust, he will ban you from the house, and you will be left with absolutely nothing. You will be entirely alone. He let go of my arm with a violent shove that made me stumble backward. I caught my balance against a stone pillar, pressing my hand against my chest in a display of absolute terror. I will do it, Derek, I whispered frantically. Please do not tell my father. I will make sure the wire goes through. Just please do not ruin my relationship with my family. Derek straightened his expensive suit jacket, looking down at me with pure venomous disgust. You do not have a relationship with this family, he said coldly. You are just a convenient wallet we keep around for emergencies. Have the money transferred by 8 a.m., or I will make sure Thomas erases you from our lives forever. He turned around and walked back up the stone pathway toward the bright lights of the glass atrium, leaving me alone in the dark garden. I waited until the heavy side door closed behind him. I stood up completely straight and wiped the fake tear from my face. The terrified trembling in my hands vanished, instantly replaced by a surge of pure cold power. Derek thought he was a brilliant predator, trapping a weak, helpless victim. He thought he held the power to destroy my life. He had absolutely no idea that I was just playing the submissive daughter to keep him completely blind to the guillotine poised directly over his neck. I did not need to worry about my father disowning me tomorrow. I owned my father. I owned his house, his debt, and his entire future, and Derek would never see the $40,000 or the millions he embezzled because Julian Pierce and the Federal Bureau of Investigation were already waiting for him at the end of the aisle. I looked up at the stars through the glass ceiling of the atrium and smiled a real, genuine smile. The shadow was done hiding. Tomorrow, the entire world was going to burn. I left the botanical garden and the oppressive, suffocating atmosphere of the rehearsal dinner behind me. The crisp night air rushed through my open car windows as I drove away from the manufactured perfection of my sister's wedding events. My hands gripped the steering wheel, but they were no longer trembling with anxiety or fear. They were entirely steady. For the past 4 hours, I had sat in the dark corner of that lavish glass atrium, listening to my father mock my existence and watching Derek parade around like a billionaire king. I had swallowed every insult. I had absorbed every cruel joke about my sad single life and my working-class salary. I had even managed to play the terrified, submissive victim when Derek cornered me in the garden and threatened to have me disowned over a bounced $40,000 wire transfer. I had played my part flawlessly, but the performance was officially over. I navigated the quiet streets of downtown Seattle, heading straight toward Maya's neighborhood. The streetlights blurred into streaks of gold against the dark pavement. I thought about Derek's desperate, panicked face in the garden. He was completely cornered, and he did not even realize that the walls closing in around him were built by the very same woman he had just called a pathetic shadow. I pulled into Maya's driveway and cut the engine. Her house was a quiet, modern sanctuary, tucked away from the chaotic noise of the city. The warm light spilling from her living room windows felt like a beacon of absolute safety after a lifetime of navigating my family's treacherous emotional minefields. I walked up the front steps and let myself in using the spare key she had given me years ago. Maya was waiting for me in the kitchen. She was wearing comfortable sweatpants and a thick, oversized sweater, a stark, comforting contrast to the rigid designer gowns and suffocating formal wear of the rehearsal dinner. She had a fresh pot of coffee brewing and 2 oversized mugs sitting on the granite counter. But my eyes were immediately drawn to the massive solid oak dining table in the next room. The entire surface of the table was covered in thick, heavy black binders. They were stacked in perfectly neat, highly organized columns. Each binder was labeled with bright red and yellow index tabs. Julian Pierce's elite corporate legal team had clearly been working around the clock to finalize the trap. I walked slowly toward the table, feeling the immense physical weight of what those binders represented. This was not just a collection of papers. This was the absolute dismantling of my father's legacy and the total destruction of Derek's freedom. Maya walked up beside me and handed me a warm mug of black coffee. She did not ask me how the rehearsal dinner went. She did not ask if my family had been cruel to me tonight. She already knew the answer to those questions. Instead, she looked at the mountain of legal documents and took a slow, deep breath. "We have everything," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with a fierce, undeniable power. Julian's lead attorneys hand-delivered the final hard copies an hour ago. The digital files are already sitting on the secure servers at the Federal Bureau of Investigation field office. But Julian wanted you to have the physical copies to hold in your hands tonight. I set my coffee mug down and reached for the first black binder on the left. The cover label simply read, "Thomas Evans' Primary Residence." My hands felt completely numb as I opened the heavy cover and flipped to the first page. It was the absolute finalized deed of transfer. The document definitively proved that the subsidiary holding company, fully controlled by my personal trust, had officially purchased the predatory secondary mortgage my father had taken out against his own home. He had recklessly gambled his entire estate to secure Derek's fake wedding vendors. Now I held the absolute legal ownership of that massive debt. I turned the page and saw the formal notice of default. Because Derek had failed to make the required collateral payments, using the frozen offshore funds my father's loan had officially and violently defaulted at 5 o'clock this evening. The next document in the binder was an expedited eviction notice, printed on heavy official stock and signed by a county judge. It mandated that Thomas Evans vacate the premises immediately upon delivery. I ran my fingers over the raised seal of the judge's signature. My father had spent 28 years threatening to kick me out of the family, to disown me, to leave me with absolutely nothing. And tomorrow morning, I was going to hand him a legal document, throwing him out of his own house. I closed the first binder and moved to the massive stack in the center of the table. These binders were incredibly thick, filled with hundreds of pages of forensic data logs and banking records. Maya stepped forward and opened the top binder, pointing to the first highly classified document. "These are the federal warrants," she explained, her voice vibrating with intense professional satisfaction. Julian's attorneys bypassed the local police entirely. They went straight to the regional director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation with the complete shadow audit we built. They presented the undeniable proof that Derek was actively embezzling millions of dollars from Pierce Holdings. They provided the exact internet protocol logs, proving Derek forged your signature and stole your social security number to open the fraudulent credit lines. And they handed over the digital routing records, proving Derek was attempting to wash those stolen millions through fake botanical vendors in the Cayman Islands. I stared at the federal seal printed at the top of the warrant. It authorized the immediate arrest of Derek for massive corporate fraud, identity theft, and international money laundering. Tomorrow, while Derek stood at the altar in his expensive tailored suit, waiting for his golden bride, federal agents would be quietly surrounding the perimeter of the botanical gardens. Maya opened the third and final stack of binders. These were the civil asset forfeiture documents. Because Derek had used stolen corporate funds to purchase his luxury vehicles, his expensive watches, and even Ashley's massive diamond engagement ring, the federal authorities were legally seizing absolutely everything. Every single dollar he had stolen was going to be violently ripped away from him. He was going down as a completely broke, convicted felon. I stepped back from the table, completely overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the justice sitting in front of me. For my entire life, I had been conditioned to believe that I was completely powerless. I was taught that my only value was my ability to quietly absorb the abuse and clean up the messes my sister and my father left behind. I had spent years desperately trying to earn a single scrap of their affection. I had drained my savings, I had sacrificed my weekends, I had swallowed my pride just to be allowed to exist in their orbit, and they had repaid my lifelong loyalty by casually plotting to send me to federal prison so they could buy imported orchids and custom silk gowns. I looked at Maya, my vision suddenly blurring with thick, hot tears. But these were not tears of pain or terror. They were tears of profound, absolute release. I did everything they ever asked me to do, I whispered, my voice cracking in the quiet room. I was always the good daughter. I paid their bills, I fixed their mistakes. I kept my head down and I never asked for anything in return. And my father still looked at me tonight in front of 300 people and told the entire world that I was a useless, invisible shadow. Maya reached out and gently placed her hands on my shoulders. She looked at me with an intensity that completely pierced through the lingering echoes of my father's cruel voice. She did not offer empty sympathy. She offered absolute, undeniable truth. You were never a shadow, Harper. Maya said, her voice firm and ringing with absolute conviction. You were the foundation holding up a house of cards. Tomorrow, you pull the foundation out. They called you invisible because they were absolutely terrified of acknowledging how desperately they needed you. They knew that without your stability, your clean credit, and your constant sacrifices, their entire fake reality would immediately collapse. They needed you to feel small so they could feel big. But you are not small, Harper. You are a brilliant, powerful woman who just outsmarted a highly sophisticated money laundering syndicate in less than 48 hours. You partnered with a ruthless billionaire, and you systematically dismantled the men who tried to destroy you. You are the strongest person I have ever known. She squeezed my shoulders, pulling me into a fierce, supportive embrace. Tomorrow you pull the foundation out, Maya repeated fiercely, holding me tight. Tomorrow you let their entire house of cards crash down exactly where it belongs. I hugged her back, feeling a profound sense of peace settle deep into my bones. The frantic, terrifying anxiety that had been suffocating me for weeks was completely gone. The desperate, aching need for my parents' validation had finally been permanently extinguished. I did not need their love anymore because I finally understood my own absolute worth. I pulled away from Maya and looked back down at the heavy black binders resting on the dining table. The documents were perfectly organized, perfectly lethal, and completely inescapable. We had spent days painstakingly constructing a flawless steel trap, and the predators were already locked firmly inside. Maya poured me a fresh cup of coffee, and we sat together at the kitchen island, listening to the quiet, steady rhythm of the rain hitting the windows. It was the early hours of the morning now. The dark sky outside was just beginning to turn a soft, bruised purple. In a few hours, the sun would rise over the city. My sister Ashley would wake up in her luxury hotel suite, surrounded by nervous bridesmaids and expensive makeup artists, completely convinced she was about to become high society royalty. Derek would put on his custom-tailored tuxedo, confident that he had successfully stolen millions of dollars and framed his naive sister-in-law for the entire crime. My father would practice his arrogant speeches, ready to parade around the botanical gardens, pretending to be a wealthy patriarch. They were all going to wake up believing they had won the ultimate prize. They had absolutely no idea that the quiet working-class sister they had mocked and discarded was currently sitting in a warm kitchen, holding their entire destruction in her hands. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, letting the dark, rich warmth ground me in the present moment. I was not afraid of the morning anymore. I welcomed it. The long, miserable years of being the disposable stepping stone were officially over. The invisible shadow was gone forever. Tomorrow morning, I was going to walk into that botanical garden wearing a beautiful dress and a genuine smile. And when the music started playing and the guests stood up, I was going to deliver the most devastating explosive justice my family had ever seen. The storm was finally here, and I was the one bringing the thunder. The clock on the wall of my apartment ticked past midnight. The torrential rain that had battered the city all evening had finally stopped, leaving behind a thick, heavy stillness. I sat alone at my small kitchen table, staring at the massive stacks of black legal binders Maya had helped me organize. Inside those binders was the complete, absolute destruction of the family that had spent 28 years treating me like a disposable burden. The forged credit applications, the offshore routing logs, the federal embezzlement warrants, and the absolute deed of ownership to my father's house all sat in neat, lethal piles. The sheer weight of the power I now held was almost difficult to comprehend. My entire life, I had been conditioned to make myself as small as possible. I was taught to absorb their cruelty, to balance their checkbooks, to swallow my own needs so that my golden sister could have the spotlight. I had spent decades desperately waiting for my father to look at me with an ounce of the pride he freely gave to Ashley. But sitting in that quiet kitchen, staring at the absolute proof of their betrayal, I realized the painful, desperate girl who just wanted her family to love her was completely gone. In her place was a woman forged from pure, cold resolve. My encrypted cell phone vibrated against the wooden table, shattering the midnight silence. The sudden buzzing made my heart skip a beat. The caller identification displayed a single initial, J. I picked up the phone and swiped the screen to answer, bringing the device to my ear. I did not say hello. I just listened to the quiet, steady breathing on the other end of the line. Julian Pierce's voice broke the silence, deep and resonant, carrying the absolute authority of a man who commanded global empires. "Harper," he said softly, "I just received the final confirmation from my lead corporate attorneys. They have finished their briefing with the regional director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." I held my breath, gripping the edge of the table. "The federal magistrates have signed every single warrant we requested." Julian continued, his tone steady and entirely unyielding. "The asset freezes are perfectly locked into the international banking grid. The specialized task force is fully briefed and armed with the shadow audit you and Maya built. They have absolute, undeniable proof of the embezzlement, the identity theft, and the money laundering." I let out a slow, steady breath. The final pieces of the trap were officially locked into place. Julian paused, letting the immense gravity of the moment settle between us. For the past 14 days, we had worked together in complete, absolute secrecy. I had seen the ruthless, brilliant mind that made him a billionaire, and he had seen the relentless, meticulous auditor beneath my quiet, beige exterior. We had built a profound, unspoken partnership, forged in the fires of mutual betrayal and a shared demand for absolute justice. He had given me access to infinite resources, and I had given him the exact weapon he needed to cleanse his empire of a massive corporate parasite. "The federal agents will be wearing plain clothes," Julian explained, his voice dropping to a low, intimate register that sent a sudden electric shiver down my spine. "They will be mingling outside the botanical garden gates by 10 in the morning, waiting for my exact signal to move in. They know to let the guests arrive. They know to let the ceremony begin. We are going to give your family the grand audience they so desperately crave." A powerful surge of anticipation washed over me. I thought about Derek sweating in his tuxedo. I thought about Ashley preening for the cameras. I thought about my father preparing to walk his golden child down the aisle, completely blind to the fact that he was walking straight into a federal takedown. "Harper," Julian said, breaking into my thoughts. His voice was suddenly incredibly gentle, but layered with a dark, thrilling promise. "Tomorrow morning, we are going to execute a sequence that will completely annihilate your family. Derek will be arrested in front of hundreds of high society guests. Your father will be publicly humiliated and legally stripped of his home because you now hold the deed. Your sister will lose every single piece of her manufactured illusion. The federal authorities will tear their entire lives apart, and they will never, ever recover from the financial and social damage." He paused again, the silence heavy with the ultimate question. Once this begins, there is absolutely no stopping it. You will never be able to go back to them. You will sever this bloodline permanently. I need to know right now if you are absolutely certain. Are you prepared to burn your old life completely to the ground? I stood up from the kitchen chair and walked slowly toward the table. I placed my free hand flat against the cold, heavy cover of the binder containing the forged documents. I looked at the falsified signatures. I looked at the platinum credit card applications Derek had filled out using my pristine social security number. I thought about my father gripping my arm at the rehearsal dinner just a few hours ago, telling me I lived a sad, single, working-class life while he secretly mortgaged his home to fund a criminal. I thought about Ashley demanding I fetch her drinks while giggling with her friends about my sensible shoes. I thought about Derek pinning me against a stone pillar in the dark, threatening to have me completely disowned if I did not drain my life savings to cover his tracks. They had deliberately, actively plotted to send me to federal prison just to buy expensive floral arrangements and maintain a fake image of wealth. They did not just want to use me. They wanted to consume me and leave me holding the ashes of my own destroyed future. They had spent 28 years trying to convince me that I was an invisible shadow. They had no idea that shadows only exist because there is a source of blinding light ready to expose everything. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the kitchen window. My spine was perfectly straight, my eyes were clear and entirely fearless. I was no longer the obedient daughter begging for crumbs of affection. I was a senior forensic auditor who had just outsmarted a multi-million-dollar money laundering syndicate. I gripped the phone tighter, feeling the undeniable chemistry and profound respect radiating from the billionaire on the other end of the line. I am ready to strike the match, I told Julian, my voice ringing with cold, unyielding certainty. I heard a soft, low chuckle on the other end of the line. It was a dark, thrilling sound of pure anticipation. It was the sound of a man who recognized an equal standing right beside him. "Get some sleep," Harper Julian promised softly. "I will see you at the altar." The line went dead. I lowered the phone and stood alone in the quiet apartment. The crushing, terrifying weight of the fraudulent debt that had been suffocating me for weeks was completely gone. I did not feel a single drop of pity for the people who shared my blood. I only felt a profound, absolute release. Tomorrow morning, the sun would rise and the ultimate trap would snap shut. I turned off the kitchen light and walked toward my bedroom, ready for the dawn. The morning sun poured through the massive vaulted glass ceiling of the city botanical garden, creating a breathtaking canopy of light over the most expensive lie ever told. My family had transformed the sprawling indoor conservatory into a $150,000 spectacle. Thousands of rare white orchids imported directly from South America, draped from the iron trellises in thick, heavy cascades. Crystal chandeliers were suspended from the glass dome, catching the sunlight and throwing prisms across the pristine white carpet that ran the entire length of the grand aisle. A 20-piece live string orchestra sat elevated on a platform, softly playing a classical prelude that echoed through the lush green space. 300 elite guests were seated in rows of perfectly aligned gold chairs, murmuring in hushed, respectful tones. They were titans of industry-wealthy socialites and distant relatives who had shown up to witness the crowning achievement of the Evans family. They were entirely oblivious to the fact that they were sitting inside a massive crime scene. Every single petal, every crystal goblet, every note played by the orchestra was funded by fraudulent credit lines and stolen corporate wealth. I stood in the opulent marble foyer just outside the massive, heavy wooden doors that led into the main atrium. For months, I had been told exactly where to stand, what to say, and how to look. I had been handed a frumpy, shapeless beige bridesmaid dress and ordered to blend into the background. I was supposed to be standing at the altar right now, a quiet, pathetic prop to make Ashley's radiant beauty seem even brighter, but the beige dress was currently lying in a crumpled heap on the floor of a hotel room 10 miles away. Instead, I was wearing a stunning, meticulously tailored emerald green designer gown that Maya had personally selected for me. It draped perfectly across my figure, falling to the marble floor in a sleek, dramatic silhouette. My hair, which my mother usually demanded I pull back into a severe tight bun, fell in loose soft waves over my shoulders. For the first time in 28 years, I was not hiding. I was not shrinking. I was stepping into the light. Standing right beside me was Julian Pierce. He wore a razor-sharp midnight blue suit that practically radiated pure, unadulterated power. His presence alone was enough to shift the gravity in the room. This was the billionaire chief executive officer whose personal corporate accounts had been targeted by the groom currently standing at the altar. Julian held out his arm to me, his dark eyes locking onto mine with a silent, thrilling promise. We could hear the faint, muffled sounds of the string orchestra shifting their tempo through the thick wooden doors. It was time. I slipped my hand through his arm, resting my palm against the warm, solid fabric of his suit jacket. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands were completely steady. Inside the massive glass atrium, the classical prelude faded into a triumphant, majestic march. This was the musical cue for the ring-bearer to make his entrance, marking the final moment before the grand arrival of the bride. From my position in the foyer, I could perfectly imagine the scene unfolding inside. Derek would be standing at the altar, shifting his weight in his expensive custom tuxedo, trying to mask the absolute panic rising in his throat over his frozen offshore accounts. My father, Thomas, would be standing at the back of the aisle, clutching Ashley's arm, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride, completely convinced he had secured our family a flawless financial dynasty. The 300 guests would be turning in their seats perfectly synchronized, waiting to coo over a small child carrying a velvet pillow. Instead, the massive double doors were thrown violently open. The heavy wood slammed against the marble walls with a deafening, echoing boom that completely shattered the delicate classical music. The sudden violent noise made several guests physically jump in their seats. The orchestra stumbled, the cellist dragging a harsh, discordant note across his strings before the music died out entirely. The massive glass atrium plunged into an absolute stunned, breathless silence. 300 heads snapped toward the entrance, expecting to see a confused child. Instead, they saw me. I stood perfectly framed in the grand entryway, the morning sun hitting the emerald silk of my gown. I did not look down. I did not slump my shoulders. I walked forward into the light, holding the arm of one of the most powerful and recognizable billionaires in the country. The collective gasp that ripped through the crowd was loud enough to echo off the vaulted glass ceiling. I heard frantic, confused whispers rippling through the rows of gold chairs. Relatives who had mocked my sensible shoes the night before now stared at me with wide, unblinking eyes, completely unable to comprehend the transformation. I was no longer the invisible working-class sister. I looked like a woman who owned the entire building. Julian and I walked slowly and deliberately down the pristine white carpet. Our footsteps echoed rhythmically in the dead silence of the room. I kept my gaze locked straight ahead, drinking in the absolute destruction unfolding at the end of the aisle. Derek was standing at the altar, and he looked like he had just been shot. The arrogant, smug smirk he had worn for months was completely gone. His face drained of all color, turning a sickly, terrifying shade of gray. His eyes bugged out of his head, staring directly at Julian Pierce. Derek knew exactly who Julian was. He knew that the man walking down the aisle with the sister he had framed was the billionaire he had just tried to rob of $2 million. Derek's knees visibly buckled. He grabbed the edge of the floral archway to keep himself from collapsing right there on the altar. He looked like he was about to violently pass out. He was completely trapped, and the realization was suffocating him in real time. Halfway down the aisle, my father and my sister were frozen in place. They had been poised to begin their grand procession, but my entrance had completely derailed their perfect moment. Ashley stopped dead in her tracks. Her custom-imported silk gown pooled around her feet, but she completely ignored it. Her perfectly contoured face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She stared at my designer gown, and then her eyes darted to Julian. The realization that I had completely stolen her spotlight, that I was walking down her aisle, commanding the absolute attention of every single guest in the room, made her physically sick. Her pristine complexion turned a pale, nauseating shade of green. She opened her mouth to scream, but shock had completely paralyzed her vocal cords. My father Thomas recovered from his initial shock, and his face rapidly flushed with a deep, explosive red. The veins in his neck bulged against his tight collar. He could not process the reality of Julian Pierce, so his brain defaulted to the only dynamic he understood. He saw his obedient punching bag stepping out of line. He dropped Ashley's arm and took 2 aggressive steps toward the center of the aisle, completely ignoring the 300 guests watching his every move. "Harper!" He barked, his voice cracking like a whip through the silent atrium. "What in the hell do you think you are doing? You are completely ruining the procession. You were supposed to be standing quietly at the altar 10 minutes ago. What are you wearing? Get out of the way, you useless shadow, before you completely destroy your sister's perfect day." I did not stop walking. I did not flinch at his tone. I let his cruel, humiliating words hang in the air for every single elite guest to hear. I wanted them to witness exactly who Thomas Evans really was. I stopped exactly 3 feet away from my father. Julian stood right beside me, an immovable wall of silent, lethal power. I looked my father directly in the eyes. I saw the arrogant, patriarchal fury burning in his gaze, and I felt absolutely nothing but cold, quiet pity. He was screaming at me to get out of the way, completely oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath his feet had already collapsed. I just smiled, a slow, devastating smile. "I am not ruining the procession, Thomas," I said, my voice projecting clearly and calmly across the dead silent room. "I'm just getting started." The silence in the grand glass atrium was absolute. 300 wealthy guests held their collective breath, waiting for my father to unleash his legendary temper. For 28 years, my father had controlled every room he walked into through sheer intimidation and volume. He expected me to cower. He expected me to drop my gaze and apologize for disrupting Ashley's flawless high society wedding. But I did not shrink back, and I certainly did not yell. I did not need to raise my voice because I held all the power. I stood in my emerald silk gown, perfectly poised, and spoke with cold corporate precision. Every single syllable sliced through the heavy air with surgical accuracy. I looked directly at Derek, who was practically vibrating with terror at the altar. I told Derek that his intricate little Cayman Islands routing sequence was amateur at best. I informed him that a truly skilled financial criminal would have known better than to use an internal company server to initiate a massive fraudulent wire transfer. Derek's jaw actually dropped. His perfectly styled hair was clinging to his forehead with nervous sweat. He tried to take a step backward, but he hit the floral archway, sending a shower of expensive white orchids tumbling onto the pristine white carpet. He looked like a trapped animal, desperately searching for an exit that did not exist. Before Derek could even attempt to formulate a pathetic excuse, Julian Pierce stepped forward. Julian did not look like a wedding guest. He looked like an executioner. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace that made the wealthy socialites in the front row physically lean back in their gold chairs. Julian bypassed my father entirely and fixed his dark, unyielding stare directly on his vice president. The sheer force of the billionaire's presence pinned Derek to the spot. "Derek Hartley." Julian said, his voice echoing through the vaulted glass ceiling with devastating authority. "You are officially terminated from Pierce Holdings, effective immediately. You were incredibly foolish to believe you could embezzle $2.4 million from my private acquisition accounts without triggering my internal security protocols. You abused your position, you manipulated corporate assets, and you attempted to frame an innocent, brilliant woman to cover your massive, staggering incompetence." A loud collective gasp ripped through the audience. 300 people began whispering frantically. The elite executives who had just toasted to Derek's incredible financial acumen at the rehearsal dinner were now staring at him with pure, unadulterated disgust. Derek opened his mouth, his hands shaking violently at his sides, but no sound came out. Julian took one more step closer to the altar, completely invading Derek's personal space. And just to be absolutely clear, Derek. Julian continued, his tone dropping to a lethal, icy register. "You are not just losing your job today. I have spent the last 48 hours coordinating directly with federal authorities. There are currently 12 agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation waiting right outside those botanical garden gates. They have a federal warrant for your arrest on multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and massive corporate embezzlement. They are just waiting for my signal to come in and put you in handcuffs. Derek let out a pathetic strangled noise. His knees physically buckled, and he collapsed onto the first step of the altar, grabbing his chest as if he could not pull in enough oxygen. Suddenly, a shrill, piercing scream shattered the tension. Ashley threw her bridal bouquet onto the floor, stomping her satin heels against the marble. Her face was flushed an ugly, blotchy red, and the veins in her neck were popping. She pointed a manicured finger directly at me, her flawless bridal facade completely dissolving into an ugly, feral rage. "She is lying!" Ashley shrieked, her voice echoing violently across the room. "She is a jealous, bitter monster. Harper has always hated me. She is just trying to ruin my perfect day because she is a sad, lonely loser who cannot stand to see me happy. Derek is a massive success. He is a millionaire. Harper is just making all of this up to destroy my wedding. Tell them, Thomas, tell them she is insane." Ashley turned to our father, expecting him to immediately back her up and throw me out of the venue. My father puffed out his chest, his face twisting with aggressive patriarchal fury. He took a step toward me, pointing his finger like a weapon. "Harper, you are going to walk out of those doors right now," my father commanded, his voice booming with desperate authority. "You are going to leave this property, and you are never going to speak to this family again. I will not let your pathetic delusions ruin my legacy." I did not blink. I did not move a single muscle. Instead, I calmly reached out to Maya, who had quietly stepped out from the back of the atrium. She handed me a sleek, heavy black folder. It was thick with documents and completely unbranded. I took the folder and walked slowly toward my father. The 300 guests watched in absolute mesmerized silence as the invisible shadow of the Evans family approached the mighty patriarch. I stopped exactly 2 feet away from him. I held out the black folder. My father stared at it as if it were a live explosive, but his arrogant pride forced him to snatch it from my hands. "Open it, Thomas," I said, my voice perfectly level, carrying the undeniable weight of absolute truth. "Read your legacy." My father ripped open the cover of the folder. I did not need to look at the pages to know exactly what he was seeing. I narrated the contents for the entire room to hear. The first section contains the verified Internet Protocol logs and the federal fraud applications I stated clearly. They prove that Derek stole my social security number and opened $150,000 in fraudulent credit to pay for this absurd wedding. But more importantly, Thomas, they prove that the digital signature originated directly from the secure network inside your home. You knowingly handed my pristine financial identity to a criminal so you could pretend to be a wealthy father of the bride. My father's eyes darted rapidly across the pages. The aggressive red color in his cheeks began to rapidly drain away, replaced by a sickly pale gray. His hands started to tremble, slightly rustling the heavy paper. "Turn to the next section." I instructed, my tone completely devoid of any emotion. "Those are the federal wire fraud traces provided directly by Julian's legal team. They document the exact path of the $2.4 million Derek embezzled. They show how he tried to route the stolen corporate funds through fake botanical vendors in the Cayman Islands to pay off the fraudulent credit cards in my name." My father flipped the page, and a loud, ragged breath escaped his lips. He was staring at the undeniable concrete proof of federal crimes that he had personally facilitated. But I was not finished. The ultimate absolute destruction was waiting on the very last page. "Now, look at the final document, Thomas," I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, lethal whisper that somehow carried to the very back row of the massive atrium. "Look at the deed." My father turned to the last page. His entire body went completely rigid. He stopped breathing. The folder began to violently shake in his hands. "To secure the initial bridge loans for Derek's fake wedding vendors, you quietly put your house up as collateral," I explained, speaking with absolute chilling clarity. "You signed the deed over to a predatory secondary lender because you were so desperate to fund this high society illusion. But Derek never made the final payment because Julian and I froze his offshore accounts. Your loan officially defaulted yesterday evening. My father looked up at me, his eyes wide with pure, unadulterated terror. He finally realized the absolute magnitude of what he was holding. My corporate holding company purchased your predatory debt 3 days ago. Julian Pierce added, stepping up right beside me and driving the final nail into the coffin. And I transferred the absolute legal ownership of that debt directly into Harper's personal trust. I looked my father straight in the eyes, watching 28 years of his arrogant cruelty completely evaporate into thin air. You do not have a legacy, Thomas, I said, delivering the final, devastating blow. You do not even have a home. I own the deed. I own your debt. You have exactly 24 hours to pack your bags and get off my property. The entire grand glass atrium fell into a stunned, breathless silence as I handed the sleek black folder to my father. Thomas stared at the documents. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the cold, clinical precision of a senior forensic auditor who had completely dismantled an entire criminal enterprise. I looked my father directly in his terrified eyes and explained exactly how his own blinding arrogance had destroyed him. To secure the initial bridge loans for Derek's fake wedding vendors, you quietly put your house up as collateral. I told him, my voice ringing clear and steady across the room. You signed the deed over to a predatory secondary lender. But Derek never made the final collateral payment because Julian and I froze his offshore accounts. Your loan officially defaulted yesterday evening. My father looked up at me, his face draining of all remaining color, turning a sickly ashen gray. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. My corporate holding company purchased your predatory debt 3 days ago. Julian Pierce added, his deep voice echoing with absolute authority. And I transferred the absolute legal ownership of that debt directly into your daughter's personal trust. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single folded piece of heavy, official paper. I held it out to my father. This is a court-ordered eviction notice. Thomas, I told him, watching the total, devastating reality finally crush his patriarchal pride. Derek failed to make the payment. I am the sole legal owner of your estate. You have exactly 24 hours to pack your bags and get off my property. My father stumbled backward, completely losing his balance, as the heavy wooden doors at the back of the botanical garden violently crashed open. The loud echoing boom completely shattered whatever was left of the ceremony. 12 federal agents wearing tactical vests over their dress shirts streamed into the massive glass room, moving with rapid military precision. The bright yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation gleamed under the crystal chandeliers. The 300 wealthy guests scrambled out of their gold chairs, gasping in shock, as the agents immediately bypassed the crowd and marched straight toward the altar. Derek Hartley, the lead federal agent, announced, his voice booming across the stunned crowd. You are under arrest for massive corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft. Derek completely panicked. His polished, wealthy facade completely shattered, leaving behind a desperate, cornered coward. He tried to take a step backward, but he hit the floral archway, sending a shower of expensive white orchids tumbling onto the pristine white carpet. He looked like a trapped animal desperately searching for an exit that did not exist. 2 federal agents grabbed his arms, twisting them forcefully behind his back and snapping cold steel handcuffs onto his wrists with a loud metallic click. Derek let out a pathetic, strangled noise, his knees physically buckling as the agents read him his Miranda rights and began dragging him back down the white aisle in front of every single elite executive who had just praised his financial brilliance the night before. A shrill, piercing scream ripped through the atrium. Ashley dropped her bridal bouquet onto the marble floor, her flawless bridal facade completely dissolving into an ugly feral panic. She was wearing a $10,000 custom imported silk gown, but right now, she looked entirely pathetic. She fell to her knees, ruining the expensive fabric, sobbing uncontrollably as she watched her wealthy, perfect groom being violently hauled away by federal law enforcement. The grand, luxurious life she had demanded and expected was completely evaporating right before her eyes. She looked up from the floor mascara running down her perfectly contoured cheeks, her chest heaving with desperate, ragged breaths. And then she saw it. She saw Julian Pierce, the actual billionaire chief executive officer she had always desperately wanted, standing right beside me. He was not looking at her. He was looking at me with profound respect and admiration. He reached out and gently took my hand, intertwining his fingers with mine in a display of absolute, unbreakable solidarity. Ashley stopped crying for a fraction of a second, her eyes going wide with pure, unadulterated horror. The realization that her entire wealth was a complete illusion, while the invisible sister she had bullied her entire life was now holding the hand of a true titan of industry, made her physically sick. She buried her face in her hands and let out a long, agonizing wail of total devastation. My father watched his entire world crumble into absolute ashes. The powerful legacy he had bragged about was completely gone. His golden son-in-law was a handcuffed felon. His golden daughter was a sobbing mess on the floor. And his own massive house legally belonged to the daughter he had treated like garbage for 28 years. Thomas fell to his knees right beside Ashley, tears streaming down his aging face. He looked up at me, his hands clasped together in a pathetic display of submission. "Harper, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a desperate, pathetic whine. "Please do not do this. I am your father. I raised you. You cannot throw me out on the street. We are family. Please, Harper, have some mercy." I looked down at the man who had spent decades trying to erase my existence. I did not feel a single drop of anger anymore. I did not feel sadness. I just felt a clean, absolute emptiness where my love for him used to reside. I let go of Julian's hand and took one step closer to my father, looking down at his tear-stained face. "Shadows do not feel pity, Dad," I said, my voice soft, cold, and entirely final. "They just disappear." I turned my back on my biological family and walked down the white aisle with Julian Pierce leaving the ruins of their fake empire behind me forever. 6 months have passed since that spectacular morning at the Botanical Garden, and my reality has shifted in ways I never could have imagined. I am currently sitting at the head of the massive mahogany table in the primary executive boardroom on the 52nd floor of Pierce Holdings. I am no longer wearing plain beige or trying to shrink myself to avoid attention. I am wearing a sharp, meticulously tailored navy blue suit, and I command the room as the new lead financial auditor for the entire global corporation. I look out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling, brilliant skyline, feeling the warm morning sunlight on my face. The view is absolutely breathtaking. But the true beauty of my life right now is the profound, absolute freedom I feel in my chest every single day. The heavy, suffocating weight of my toxic family is completely, permanently gone. Derek Hartley is currently serving a 15-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The Federal Bureau of Investigation dismantled his entire money laundering syndicate and seized absolutely everything he owned. He lost every single dime he embezzled, and his precious corporate reputation was entirely publicly obliterated. There are no expensive custom-tailored tuxedos or imported luxury watches where he is going. He is just another inmate wearing a standard-issue uniform, completely stripped of the arrogant power he used to terrorize me. My father Thomas and my sister Ashley are facing their own brutal reality. They are currently living together in a cramped, dingy, one-bedroom apartment on the extreme noisy outskirts of the city. Because my father knowingly participated in Derek's massive identity theft and wire fraud scheme, he was hit with severe civil penalties and crippling legal fees. The man who cared about nothing but his elite status completely lost his country club membership, his wealthy golf buddies, and the fake aristocratic legacy he valued far more than his own daughter. He is drowning in relentless debt and entirely shunned by the high society he brutally sacrificed me to impress. Ashley is working a grueling minimum wage retail job at a discount department store just to help pay their basic utility bills. Her days of demanding rare imported orchids, sipping expensive champagne, and screaming at terrified event planners are permanently over. She has to ride the crowded city bus every single morning, and I heard through the family grapevine that she physically breaks down and cries every time she sees a silver Mercedes-Benz driving down the street. They desperately wanted a lavish high society life, funded entirely by my utter ruin, but they built their own miserable prison instead. I do not call them. I do not check on them. I do not feel a single ounce of guilt. The silence they left behind has been filled with genuine, profound happiness. Maya, my brilliant and fiercely loyal best friend, was massively promoted to a senior executive director position at her corporate bank. She runs her own massive department now, and we still meet for coffee every single Sunday morning, laughing about the flawless digital trap we built together to take down a monster. And then there is Julian. Julian Pierce did not just give me my career back and elevate me to the highest ranks of his company. He gave me a partnership built on absolute mutual respect, undeniable trust, and a shared demand for justice. We started dating 3 months ago, and it has been the most incredible experience of my life. He looks at me like I am the brightest, most powerful light in every single room we enter. He deeply values my mind, my forensic strength, and my absolute refusal to ever back down again. We are building a spectacular, beautiful life together, grounded in honesty and real love, not manufactured toxic illusions. For 28 years, I genuinely believed I was destined to be the quiet, invisible shadow of the Evans family. I thought my only purpose on this earth was to silently absorb their cruelty and clean up the massive disasters my sister and my father left behind. I thought that if I just sacrificed enough of myself, if I just stayed quiet enough, they would eventually see my worth and love me. I was completely, utterly wrong. Shedding the title of the good invisible daughter was the absolute best thing I ever did for my own soul. I stopped waiting for my cruel family to drag me out of the dark, and I simply built my own spectacular light. I want to take a moment to talk directly to you right now because I know exactly how heavy and suffocating that dark, invisible burden feels. If your family only values you for what you can sacrifice for them, that isn't love. It is pure exploitation. You do not owe your life, your hard-earned savings, or your mental sanity to people who only view you as a convenient stepping stone for their own selfish desires. You do not have to stay hidden in the dark just because they are desperately afraid of your light. You have the absolute unyielding right to set your boundaries, to fiercely protect your peace, and to walk away from anyone who actively tries to diminish your worth. Never let anyone forge your future or tell you that you are just a shadow meant to serve their arrogant needs. Shadows do not have to tolerate the abuse. They can rise up and completely blind the people who kept them down. You absolutely deserve to be the main character of your own spectacular life, and you hold the power to strike the match whenever you are ready. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps me share these important stories with women who really need to hear them. I would love to know where you are watching from right now and what time it is there. Drop it in the comments below so we can connect. Until next time, please take care of yourselves. You completely deserve it.